So good morning, everybody. Very happy to see you this morning. Look at you, what a great group we have, and everybody is fresh and energetic. I've heard you've all gone to bed at 9 in the evening yesterday, so very good choice. My name is Wojciech Bońkowski. I run the leading Polish wine magazine Ferment, but the real reason I'm here is that I'm probably the oldest friend of Beata in this room. We've known each other since 2002. Happy birthday, Beata, 16 years in the wine trade and 10 years Vinia Fini. And I'll be moderating this panel, and together with me is Susan Hulme from Britain. Susan is a Master of Wine and actually the Lily Bollinger Trophy winner in the Master of Wine examination, which is the equivalent of being the world's champion of sommeliers, and is a renowned expert on Italian wines, judging for IWC and writing for Decanter. So a warm welcome to Susan. And we and we also have two sommeliers, Pawła Demieniuka, who is a Polish sommelier champion in 2011 and is now a partner and sommelier at Kieliszki na Hożej and na Próżnej. And Kamila Wojtasiaka, who is the next Polish sommelier this year, and who is the sommelier at Butchery&Wine. And they will be both offering us insights into how these wines work in real life, as opposed to journalistic imagination. So just a bit of housekeeping. You all have a list of wines. The real challenge today is going to be the wine service, because we have a very limited time to taste these lovely wines. So Filip Szaciłowski, who is head of service, is going to have the toughest job. Mine is going to be the easiest, because describing fantastic wines that we have today on the tasting is going to be an absolute pleasure. The concept is that we have selected the single most interesting wine from each winery that is participating in the event. So we really should have a fantastic lineup of wines. And we are starting with champagne. If you have any questions or any comments on the wines, just please interrupt and please speak, because we will be moving pretty swiftly from wine to wine. So don't wait until the end to have any remark on the wines. And we're starting with, of course, with a glass of champagne. Nothing better for breakfast, as we know. But we have a very special champagne. I'm just going to wait until everybody has got it in the glass so that we analyze it. But it is coming from the champagne house of Fleury. And we have Valérie with us today. Do we? Okay. Hi, Valérie. Fleury is actually a pretty small house by champagne standards, only making 200,000 bottles per year. And this wine is one of their top cuvées. Robert Fleury is named after one of the founders, Extra Brut 2005. The interest of this wine is that it's not only an older vintage, so we've got a wine that is nearly 13 years of age, but also it's very atypical in Champagne for including a large proportion of Pinot Blanc. As you know, Pinot Blanc is one of the 7 grape varieties permitted in Champagne, but there are maybe 5 or 6 wines that actually include it, because normally it's not really grown anymore. The situation is similar to Burgundy, whereas also, as all the sommeliers will know before they take an exam, Pinot Blanc is permitted to use in many appellations. So everybody has got the champagne. So first of all, cheers to everybody. Thank you for being here in Warsaw. This is not really an aperitif champagne. It's more really of a food champagne, or even Italians, which are, I think, the majority in the room today, would say champagne da meditazione. It's a meditation champagne because it's so complex and so rich and so layered. Of course, the long time on the lees, but you will also get some oak notes, because this is the base wines are fermented in oak. This is again atypical for Champagne, although now more and more widespread, especially for the boutique houses. Paweł, you are serving the champagne with food. what sort of food would you recommend with a wine that is so rich? This is really like a white Burgundy with some bubbles more than a sparkling wine as we normally know it.
Yes, exactly. So the wine is very powerful, very rich, but a little bit of the evolution we have here. I always say that it's better to celebrate something with the glass of champagne than without. So thanks to Beata, we can enjoy today this beautiful champagne and from the best importer Vinia Fini, and thanks to, of course, Fleury family. As you say, Wojtek, during the dinner, I always, with this champagne, I will stay all the dinner. Start from the aperitif through some fish appetizer, then with for example, stew of the veal with some mushrooms, because of the evolution of this wine, and as a dessert itself. So I can enjoy all the dinner with just this wine. So, thank you.
Champagne for the entire dinner. My initial thoughts were going towards cheese. I like to surprise people by serving wine like this with camembert or brie. So cheeses that are very powerful in flavor, not so easy to match sometimes. People would often put red wines with them, but I think it's better to put a very rich white wine. You recently served this wine to me when I was dining at Kieliszki with Richard Bamfield, a master of wine from England, and he made this very good remark that the best champagnes of the new wave, which I think this wine very well represents, have this very salty character, and especially aided by the complete dryness of this wine, because it's only about 3 grams dosage, I think, yes, extra brut, very low. So this saline, very savory dimension is emerging, which I think is an interesting trend in Champagne. We sadly move on to the second wine on the list, which is Arneis from Piemonte, and I hand over to Susan, who's presenting this wine.
Good morning, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here, so I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I'm delighted to be here and talking about some really lovely wines. Arneis is one of those varieties which, one of the many interesting white varieties of Piemonte, which is attracting a little bit of attention now. It's got that very pretty aromatics, something like lime blossom, lime flowers, some citrus, yellow flowers kind of fruit. This one is made in a slightly more serious way, in the sense that it's a wine that can age, that has some aging potential. It's a meticulous selection of the Fuso vineyard, which faces southeast on a marl soil. And the grapes are harvested in 3 stages. I'm looking over at the owner and winemaker over there in case I miss anything for the moment. But in 3 stages. So they would harvest the ripest grapes and keep them under ice. And sometimes there might be as much as 15 days between the second part of the harvest, and then there will even be a third harvest sometimes. And then the grapes will be put together and fermented. And the fact that the freshly picked grapes and the grapes that have been kept under ice will make the temperature just the way they would like it. Just have a moment to taste it if you haven't already. Again, as well as these sort of pretty floral aromatics, there is a more textural side to this one. And this wine is kept on the lees, with batonnage on the fine lees in stainless steel, temperature control. And this, of course, gives it more roundness, more mid-palate, more body, and more potential to age. So I think this is a really lovely combination of everything that's very pretty about the variety, but also with some more serious body and texture and weight to it. And as it's dry, with an impression of florality, what do the sommeliers think this would go with?
I really like to serve this wine with the very traditional Polish dish, like the herring. So the very salty white fish usually is the classic pickled, so it's good comparing with this nice, vibrant acidity.
I really love this wine, and I love the work of the producer, Giuseppino Anfossi, who is here with us, a long-time friend of mine, and not only because each year he invites me to a lovely dinner to his place, and his wife is a glorious cook, I can tell you, better than many restaurants in the area, but also we each time have a vertical of this wine from several vintages. So each year I can taste 2014, but each year the wine is 1 year older, and it's really fascinating how well it ages. And I think it's going to be a recurrent theme today of our tasting. Many producers in this room are working very hard to make modest grape varieties, modest terroirs, elevated to a very high level, because Arneis is really a grape for aperitif wine. It's a glorious aperitif wine, but nobody takes it very seriously. It's normally an easy commercial wine, and there are only very few producers who look at it more seriously. And we specifically have no Cabernet Sauvignon or no Chardonnay today on the tasting, but we are tasting many interesting, lesser-known varieties that are made super serious by great winemakers like Giuseppino and his consultant Sergio. Is Sergio with us or still? Okay. Maybe still partying, because Sergio is a party animal, I can tell you. Last time he came to Warsaw, we had a vodka tasting. Okay. On to the next wine, please. And this is over to you, Susan, again for the Falanghina.
Okay, so Astroni from Campi Flegrei, a very sort of historically, classically famous area, meaning fields of fire in Campania. And it's actually a caldera of an extinct volcano, so it's a very special landscape. The Falanghina has also become, in our market anyway, in the UK, pretty popular and quite trendy at the moment. And I noticed when I was in New York as well, there were a lot of these southern Italian white varieties, such as Fiano Diabolino, Falanghina, and Greco di Tufo, that seemed to be very popular with the on-trade. And I'm happy about that, because they have a lot of personality and character. This wine, when I was speaking to the owner, the winemaker yesterday, was telling me he wanted to get across the fact that it's a very salty soil and it's near the sea. So there's a lot of these savory, salty characteristics. I suppose what Italians would more likely call sapido, but for us we would say savory or slightly salty flavors, which of course is something that's very positive when paired with food. So you've got the salty soil, you've got the sea, which is nearby, contributing to this, and sun. I think those were the characteristics that I really wanted to come across. This is free-run juice fermented in stainless steel, started with natural yeast, and then inoculated a strain of yeast derived from the vineyard to complete the fermentation. Fermented very cool, racked and refined on lees for about 6 months. And I think you can really feel that salty savouriness on the palate, can't you, when you finish, on the finish of the wine. It starts with an impression of almost an element of honeyed impression, or very ripe fruit, and then it finishes very dry and savoury. So again, this is one that is very compatible, I think, with lots of food matching.
This is one of the many volcanic wines that we have today, and they're also a topic recurrent in wine criticism in restaurants, and I'm sure many of you know the book about volcanic wines by John Sabo in Canada that is subtitled Salt and Grit. And so I think, this wine is showing these two characteristics. And there is actually an interesting parallel to the next wine that we have on the list, which is Pinot Bianco from Alto Adige, because this is also coming from volcanic soils. And those of you who know this region for its wines, or maybe you go skiing there, both good ideas, and you can do it in the same day. There is a lot of volcanic character to the soils there. Now, this wine is interesting to me for several reasons. One is that I really love Alto Adige, because Alto Adige is this strange borderline region of Italy where people speak German, and they are very diplomatically calling themselves German-speaking Italians, but of course ethnically they are Austrians. I love this region because it seems to do so many things well. Normally, wine regions specialize in a grape variety, in a style, but if you go to the Dolomites, to Alto Adige, they make a wide range of grape varieties at really supremely high levels of quality. You can have world-class Sauvignon Blanc in one of the wineries, then you move on, they have great Gewürztraminer. And I think the most underrated grape variety, not only in Alto Adige, but anywhere in the world, honestly, is probably Pinot Blanc, Pinot Bianco. This is now changing. I think people are starting to notice Pinot Bianco is so very useful on your dinner table, is so very useful in a restaurant. It is fresher than Chardonnay. It is more textural and more engaging than Sauvignon Blanc. And I can see a renaissance of this grape anywhere in the world. But honestly, anybody who grows Pinot Bianco can really learn from the Alto Adige, because it's probably the best examples of this grape made anywhere, and especially this wine. This wine was judged by Gambero Rosso, the best white wine of Italy, a few years back. I think it was the 2012 vintage. So this is quite an accolade, because you have the great white wines of Friuli, you have the great white wines of Campania, and even in Alto Adige, normally you would rather promote Sauvignon Blanc or Gewürztraminer. So this is their special selection. This is a wine that ages 8 months in large oak, very concentrated. For me, the point of this wine is really the intensity and the depth of flavor. Pinot Bianco, Pinot Blanc is never really a showstopper. Okay, this is not really something that sort of impresses you on the first attempt. It's not so very aromatic, but it is more about the tactile impression on the palate, the texture, the breadth. It's got battery notes, but also good acidity, higher than Chardonnay. It's a related family of grapes. So I think really a fascinating wine, and also ages very well. You might be familiar with the Terlano white wines, Cantina Terlano, that can age for 30, 40 years, and most often when they are based on Pinot Blanc. But also Sirmian has a great track record. But this is a harder wine to match convincingly, I think. Kamil, no?
Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy to see so many faces and a great producer in one room. That's really pleasure. We can speak next to you. And I'm really happy that we show the Pinot Bianco Sirmian by Nazma Grades, not the Pinot Grigio, because the Pinot Grigio grabs all of the attention in Alto Adige, and the Pinot Bianco is just in the shadow. Over here, there is a really, as Wojciech said, the top example of the Pinot Bianco. The wine is very textured, a little bit fatty, but still with a great acidity. It's not very difficult to match such a great wine with the food. Even most of the people was yesterday in the gala dinner, and there was one dish, the citrus with kohlrabi, which was served by chef of Kieliszki na Hożej, and Paweł choosing the wine. Paweł chose the Grüne Veltliner, if I remember, the Hohenberg. Riesling by Echmose. But my choice was the Sirmian Pinot Bianco, because the texture of the wine, the great acidity, can go in well and cut through the fatness in the throat. I don't think so. That is a wine which is very difficult with the matching with the food. That's really pleasant wine.
This is sometimes my secret weapon when I don't know how to match food and wine. I remember we had a matching workshop at one of the top restaurants here in Warsaw, and we have a very nice but very hard to match risotto with shrimps. And they added typically some cream to the risotto. In Italy, if you do this, it's death penalty, but in Poland, sometimes people do to enhance the texture, but it makes the food pairing very difficult. And I remember we went through maybe 10 or 12 wines, oak Chardonnay, Greco, whatever, and then I was thinking of maybe Pinot Bianco, and this was the wine that did the trick, because it's got this very hidden power, this hidden extract. The extract is helping the wine to age, and is also helping with those most difficult matches when you have something really very consistent on your plate. Suggest we move on to the next wine, which is again a volcanic wine from Etna this time, and over to you, Susan.
Yes, Aiunta Etna Bianco, DOC. I'm just waiting to get the wine, but this one is called Piante Sparse, which means stray vines. It's one of my favorite grape varieties, 90% Caricante and 10% Catarato, approximately, because this is an old vineyard, and so it's the vines that were interspersed or were planted amongst the red vines. They're not quite sure why people did that in the past, whether it was because they wanted to add a bit of freshness and acidity to the reds, or whether it was to make a white wine for themselves. But these wines are made from a selection of small little pockets, if you like, of stray vines, or piante sparse, in the vineyard. And so they follow them, and they have to pick them very selectively. I like Caricante so much because it has, at its very best, when it's at its best, it has this laser-like, precise acidity and focus. It has a real drive about it and energy. And having tasted some of the Bananti wines, which are probably the oldest established people who produce the white Pietramarino wine, I really appreciated how well these wines can age. So it's great to see more of these wines, and they're very food friendly. I remember having this a wine made from Caricante with a sort of a steamed swordfish, and the combination was really delightful. Up to that point, I'd eaten a lot of swordfish living in Sicily for a while, but it'd never been steamed, so it made it much more delicate in style and went with this sort of lime laser-like focus. It's almost as if there's a Riesling gene in there somewhere, but a lot of DNA analysis is still to be done on Italian varieties, but in a way, that's what makes them still so exciting and different. So this one is from a 2.8 hectare old vineyard, 700 meters above sea level on the northern slopes of Mount Etna and close to the village of Randanzo, about 1 hour's drive north of Catania. No chemicals used in the vineyard, and the name Aiunta comes from a phrase that the owner's grandmother used to say to him, which was in Sicilian dialect, in order to get him to drink more milk. So she'd say, drink up, drink up. So that's where the name comes from.
There is this very famous verse by the greatest Italian poet of the 20th century, Eugenio Montale, when he talks about the flower growing on a volcano. And this becomes a metaphor of the human destiny, that we are, lost on this planet, and we are really very fragile like a flower. But why I'm talking about this is that we have this vision of Etna wines being very austere and very tight because they grow on this very difficult terroir. But actually what I love about the white wines of this area is that they are often very floral, and they're actually very approachable. They're very nice to drink. So when we were looking at the list and deciding which wine to present, we had the choice of Aiunta's red wine, but I actually thought the white wine would be something really interesting to show today. So I hope Filippo Aiunta, who is with us, agrees. And this floral character, as you know, Etna is now considered the hottest wine terroir probably in Italy and beyond. Everybody wants to be on Etna. The richest wine producers are buying hectares there. And I'm not surprised, because there is something very sensual and very approachable to these wines, but of course there is also structure and depth from the special terroir, and the combination is really exciting. I think we are being served the next wine, which is, we now move on to Spain. This wine is more specifically from Galicia, so we have Eulogio and Rebecca here from Sarate. This is one of the latest additions to the catalog of Vini Affini, and I think a really interesting one. And we have 100% Albarino grape. I'm sure very well known to everybody because it is very high on the fashion list, always makes it in the top 10 of everybody's popularity. But we have a special Albarino with a slightly different character, in my opinion, to the very classic Rías Baixas Albarino, because this wine has more texture and more consistency to it. Many Albarinos are light, very easy to drink, crisp, but this wine has a bit more. And if you taste it, I think it's taking on a sort of slightly Viognier-like texture and fatness to it, which I think is an interesting take on the Albarino. This is, of course, a 2015 vintage, so maybe the heat of the year and a couple of years aging are adding to this. But this wine is not aging in bottle for 2 years. This wine is aging 2 years in the tank on the lees. So there is this deliberate attempt to have a slightly more rich, textured and complex style for the grape. Very small production, very precise winemaking. If you have a minute today, go see this producer because they make some terrific red wines. And the red wines of Galicia are still undiscovered, but they are going to be the next big thing. So if you want to know before everybody else, go and try the Caíño Brancos, Caíño Tinto, especially, and a few more. Paweł, this is one of your favorite wines because you keep serving this with when you do food pairings for the tasting menus.
Yes, I'm very like this Albarino. So, as you say, Wojtek, most of the people when hear Albarino think about the very young and crisp mineral wine, which is to drink as quick as possible. Then here we have one of the greatest expression of this grape variety, in my opinion. So 2 years on the lees make that the wine is very rich in structure, as well a bit of the saltiness, minerality, and beautiful citrus character, like the pink grapefruit, and very nice long citrusy finish. So I really like to serve this wine with some seafood or some white fishes, but quite as well structured, like the monkfish or some cod. So that's basically work very well.
I'm sure everybody knows that in food and wine matching theory there are two trends. One is to go local, and so you're looking for the local tradition of what you match with these wines, and it always works. But what I find more interesting, because we are getting so global, is to find those very strange, very adventurous matches, and I know some Polish cuisine that goes very well with this wine, although it hasn't got anything Polish or Eastern European or continental about it. It's a very Atlantic wine, but it would go great with things that we eat in this country, such as herring or pickled vegetables, for example. Great wine, and look at the recurrent theme. This is a region that started with a single style, one grape, one terroir, one style, one flavor profile. And then there are winemakers who are trying to make something more diverse and more complex and more engaging. And so we are really seeing the revolution of quality there in Galicia. Now we're moving to a wine that's far removed geographically, maybe not so much in character. This is a paradox, and we have Martina and Josef Eimose with us, and I'm really happy to have you here, and I'm really happy to have this wine because this is not a region that importers are taking very seriously at the moment. In Austria, I think people are getting serious about Wagram, but internationally there is some work still to be done. And this wine was selected during, I think, a field trip to Austria by the team of Vinie Affini, so well done. You went off track, not just tasting Wachau and Kamptal, which is the easy bit, but Wagram is on the other side of the Danube, on the south side. As a young boy, I was very interested in Napoleon, and so I knew there was this very famous battle between France and the European coalition on these fields, and I think in some vineyards you can still find some remnants of the battle. I hope not in your vineyards. You don't find any bones anymore. So this is a Grüne Veltliner, and this is the top cuvée from this producer, Georgenberg. As most of the Wagram vineyards, this is grown on loess soil. Again, if you're not familiar with the style, you would think, this is going to give pretty light, structured wines because it's a sort of light, cool soil. But with proper dedication, you can make very serious, very structured white wines from this terroir. And I was just looking at your technical sheet before today. This wine is made from 30 hectoliters per hectare, so the yield is like Grand Cru Burgundy. And this is how you get to this quality. So the dedication of a producer in a region that doesn't command very high prices is really remarkable. And this wine then ferments in the large oak barrels, so typical of Austria. and we have a very, very concentrated Veltliner. I find less of this very overt peppery, citrusy character that you get in the lighter styles of Veltliner. For me, this is becoming more buttery, more ripe. You've got the fruit is not the green apple, so typical of the grape variety for me, but more peach and apricot. So this is really almost like a late harvest wine. Yeah, you picked this at the end of October. One of the last wines to be picked in the region.
I would like to say thank you to Martina and Josef to save our life with Kamil, because when we back from the Austria trip all night by train during the very hot summer, there was no possibility to buy even the glass of water, but we have the beautiful bottle of Magnum Gruner Veltliner 2006, and you can imagine that we don't have any Riedel glass with us.
Was it under screw cap? Because that's really useful in the train, yes? Okay, lovely wine. Thank you very much for this Veltliner. The next wine in the glass is actually a sparkling wine, but we decided to move it a little bit forward in the tasting because it is a different take on Prosecco. So we have Maurizio Favrel from Malibran, and this wine, when it came on the market, was really a revolution. I remember the first few bottles that we had in Poland, people were looking at me, what are you serving? Because the wine is cloudy, the wine is unfiltered, the wine is not disgorged. The second fermentation happens in the bottle on the lees, and then you have these lees in your bottle when you open the wine. You could, for example, decant this wine if you want to have a clearer version of the Prosecco, and some people do. I actually like to shake it, like you do shake beer. When you have beer that is aging on the yeast, you want the yeast in your glass, and this is what I do with this Prosecco. So we have 100% Glera grape, or also known as Prosecco, bone dry. Of course, if you don't take the sediment out of the bottle, you can't put the dosage as well. So it's absolutely zero sugar. When this started, it was very alternative, very fringy. Now it has become the most popular wine style in the world. It's called Pet Nat. It's produced in New Zealand, Australia, Uruguay, Poland as well. But certainly Prosecco producers are to be credited for the popularity of this style. And I write a lot about wine and marketing, and I was recently thinking, what is so attractive in this wine that young people, especially the so-called millennials, are just loving these wines? And often they think this is more interesting than drinking expensive vintage champagne, or some posh wines. And this is exactly the very relaxed approach that you can have with this wine. You can shake it or you can decant it. It is similar to beer or cider. The flavor is also a little bit different from standard white wines or standard sparkling wine. You've got all this richness of the yeast. So it's really like a crossover drink. I hope you don't mind me saying this, but really the style is bridging towards other categories of drink, and it's very useful for opening our wine world to consumers who are a little bit afraid of drinking other normal wines. And then, of course, you can educate them to drink other stuff. And I think this is also coming with a crown cap. And I would like to ask many producers here in this room, we are talking so much about closures, screw caps, diam. There is a new plastic from Nomacork with zero oxygen transmission. Brilliant. I just tasted in California some trials, amazing closure. But why don't you put more wines under crown cap? A wine that you sell within the year could have this very easily open top. And I think you would see an effect on consumers, young consumers. They would be more relaxed than pulling a cork. I know this is controversial, but we need to think about the future, who is going to drink our wines in 15, 20 years. And this could be one of the tools that we use. And I don't see any reason when we have a Sauvignon Blanc that we drink within 1 year, or even a light red wine, why it couldn't be a crown cap. It's also much cheaper, isn't it? Yes? So here we go, an advantage on your margins. And you will get a special article in Meininger about the top quality producer moving under crown cap. And Any comments? You've been so very quiet. Everybody is still meditating over the wines or over yesterday night. I hope the former. Both. Okay. So this was an introduction into a series of natural wines that we are now going to serve you, and I hope it is going to be interesting. This is now a red wine, but we are going to let it sit in the glass, and can we have the service of the Castellada straight away after this? So first some background, because Beata Vinia Fini was one of the first importers in Poland to really specialize in biodynamic wines, and then later moving on to natural wines. The selection is great, and it encompasses all the various facets of this category. So we have wines that are just organic or biodynamic, very environmentally respectful. We have a selection of orange wines, and we're going to now taste a few. But we also have wines that are made with no SO2 additions, so what we call, of course, informally natural wines. As you know, there is no really single definition of natural wines, but really there is. So it's wine that is made with no additions and low or no SO2. So it's very interesting for me, the evolution of the approach to these wines on our market, which I think is similar to other markets in Europe. At the beginning, there was outrage, and so everybody was saying, you know, this is bullshit, don't serve us this wine. I remember the first critique in Gambero Rosso of a wine by Gravner, and they said it was this opaque wine-like liquid. It's really an offensive review of one of the greatest wines that are on the market now by Gravner. So there was, even amongst established wine critics and commentators, this sort of disbelief at what people are doing. Then it became very political. So they would say, you know, this is you, but not us, okay? So we are really against you. There is the natural wine party, and there is the normal wine party. So it was, in Italy, they are always very political between the left and the right. So this was, you know, the natural winemakers were the communists, and we were the good old bourgeois center party, and we know how to make things. Then it has changed, because people suddenly started liking those communist wines. You know, they started enjoying them and actually buying them, and so you had to rethink. But it's still continuing. You might have followed the debate. Can we have the service, please, of La Castellada, Philippe? Can we have La Castellada to taste first? Thank you. There was this recent article by Hugh Johnson in Decanter, who wrote, you know, natural wines are just bullshit and they are going to disappear. They are a short error in the system, and we are going to move back to normal wines. I think he's wrong. I think this is not going to happen. Natural wines are staying, because some of them, not all of them, are really interesting and really fascinating. But normal wines, what we call conventional wines, also some of them are not so very nice, you know, so you wouldn't drink some of those normal wines. So then another critic wrote an article saying, okay, some natural wines are nice, but the proportion is too low. So the risk is too high, and the consumer really wants a more consistent product. Some consumers want consistent products, but some are happy to experiment and happy to risk.
Yeah, I think it's inspired a lot of controversy, a lot of furious and sometimes vitriolic debate on Twitter, some of these natural wines. But really, for me, the best way is to be completely open-minded. It's interesting that people are pushing the boundaries, trying to do different things. Some of these wines do flirt with what traditionally we would consider faults. So elements of oxidation, elements of reduction, but it's really the balance overall, and and how far they go, how well they manage it, I guess, that really comes across. I mean, there is an element of sometimes this bruised apple character, nuttiness, elements of oxidation, but that can make something a little more interesting. And also even elements of reduction. I know in the International Wine Challenge competition, which I judged for 9 days, I've just finished doing, we're very tolerant towards some levels of reduction, especially with young white wines. So we kind of there's been a sea change of attitude where obviously if it's completely dominating everything else, it's probably not going to win a medal. But if there's an element of it, of that flintiness, struck match, but we think there are other things underneath that are going to come out, then they tend to be rewarded quite well if there's plenty of other things going on, if you like. So I think it's exciting that people are experimenting with these things, and there are some intriguing results. Sometimes when you taste a whole range of conventionally made wines, having tasted a whole range of natural wines, they can seem a little plain. But there's good, as you said, Wojciech, there is good and bad in both sides. You can make a poor wine, conventional winemaking, or you can make a really exciting one, natural wine. So I think the main thing to take away is to be completely open-minded and find what you enjoy.
So back to this wine that we all have in the glass, because this is a good example of a wine that is completely uncontroversial. I don't think anybody will object to this wine. This is just a great wine. And so it is showing that using those techniques that we associate with natural wine, in this case it's a fully orange wine, 2 months on the skins. It is also then slightly oxidized in the oak for 3 years. The result is something that everybody is going to agree is really a major wine. This is coming from La Castellada, so this is from Collio in Friuli. We have Stefano Benza with us. This is his top cuvée, and I wanted to ask him whether the right pronunciation is VRH or is it really Virch? Stefano? Disappeared. Non c'è. Okay. Because I think it's a pun. Virch in Slovenian means the summit, and this is his top cuvée, his Reserva from Chardonnay 75% and 25% Sauvignon Blanc, and really a great expression. You can taste some other of his orange wines downstairs. He makes single variety Chardonnay and Sauvignon, and this is a blend. And for me also an insight into how white wines and orange wines can age, because this is a 10-year-old wine. So often in the criticism about natural wines or orange wines, you will hear those wines don't age. They are great when you open them, when they are young, but then they don't really have any aging potential. Not true. Again, not true. And we know it from many wines of that style, including Gravner and Radikon. Paweł, you were one of the first sommeliers to serve orange wines. Kamil as well, actually. I can remember you served Gravner by the glass. But you were one of the first sommeliers to actively promote these wines.
Yes, I really like this style of the orange or amber wine, or however you call it. I like it because it's very useful in the restaurant, because sometimes you have the dish which you need the white wine, but you need the tannins as well. So that's the unusual in the white one. And in the orange wine, you have the bit of the tannin, which is very, very light. It's soft, not like powerful like in the red wine. So I'm really like to serve this wine with some wild bird, like the pheasant, or with some pork belly barbecue, which is as well a lot of taste. So this wine is very powerful, very aromatic. So it's compared very well with the aromatic dish as well, and the fatty because the acidity is just amazing. Yeah. And I'm a big fan of the La Castellada, in my opinion, one of the best example of the orange wine we can try here.
It's an amazing wine. It recently won a panel here in Poland of our magazine Ferment for orange wines. Really impressive. And then in the other glass is a wine I'm particularly happy to see in Poland, because I have worked behind the scenes for a few years to have this producer imported, Oksanic. This is a wine from Croatia, so maybe new to some of you. But in fact, Istria, so the peninsula that belongs mostly to Croatia, but also a small part to Slovenia and Italy, is an extremely interesting place, and now a hotbed of orange and natural wines. Because they have a lovely climate to make organic and biodynamic wines, very windy, very warm, a bit less disease pressure than in many other places. And then I think the other aspect is the very free spirit of the Croatian people. They are less subject to many rules that we see in countries like maybe Italy or France, where you follow tradition or what daddy told you, or maybe your teacher at the Scuola Enologica. I think Croatia is a country of free people, free spirits, very creative. And one of them is Mladen Rožanić, the creator of this winery, but we have Mate Matic, who is the director of the estate, here with us today. And when I first visited the winery in 2011, I was completely blown away. This was amazing wine, very high quality in this most unexpected place. And all the wines had this sort of stylistic definition that I really like. Each wine was very different from the others, but they also had a common theme. And the common theme at Roksanic is very, very, very long maceration and very, very, very long oak aging. So this wine, hold on, 174 days on the skins. I think even the Georgians don't do it so long. It takes a lot of cold blood to do it. But then the result is fantastic, and the grape is Malvasia, Istarska Malvasia, so Malvasia istriana, which is a very aromatic grape. And some people say orange wine made from aromatic grapes like Moscato or Gewürztraminer is just too much. You know, it smells like perfume. I just can't keep it in the glass. I think the result is actually really interesting because you get the more deep character of the Malvasia extracted from the skins. It's not just the superficial, flowery, light fruity notes that you get in a normal vinification, but you get this sort of very deep fruity character, like really eating a peach or eating an apricot. Very direct expression of fruit, and it's a paradox. We think our technological wines are fruity, most often not so much, but you get the essence of fruit only when you really extract so much. And this wine then was 6 years in oak. Can you believe this? So I think a tour de force of winemaking, and again showing these wines can age very well. It is a bit more extreme than the previous wine of La Castellada. There is a bit of volatile acidity, so the character is a bit more lifted on this wine. It is more savory. The previous wine was maybe a bit more sweet fruity. Again, I think it's a very good fruit wine. Goes per minute and tastes with mate when you have time later. They have an amazing Merlot as well. Did you bring the Merlot 08? This is one of the great Merlots on this planet. Thank you for being here, and thank you to Beata for selecting a Croatian wine, because I promote Croatia very actively and I keep hearing the same. Very difficult to sell, nobody knows those wines. Where is Croatia? One importer asked me. Not so long after school, judging from his age. So this is a challenge, but I think it's really worth the effort, because there are some absolutely lovely wines in that country. Our next wine is now the red wine that you were poured first, so sorry about this slight change of order. So this is wine 9 on your list. And Susan, I think one of your favorite wineries in Sicily.
Yes, yes. I think this is a really interesting example of Frappato. So Frappato is usually blended with Nero di Avola in Sicily, in the Vittoria area, to make the Ceressuola, Ceressuola di Vittoria, so Frappato and Nero di Avola. And often you can get with Frappato a very light red fruits and slightly cherry sweets or slightly unresolved sugar element that stays on the palate. But this one is completely different to that. It has a more drier, serious style to it. I suppose in our terminology, what we might describe the nose as a bit funky. That's kind of a catch-all word when we have other elements that are not quite straightforward fruit, they're not spice, they just have this sort of element of this balance between reduction and oxidation, but it adds a bit of interest to this wine. I think it makes it kind of intriguing. You want to know more. When you pick up the glass, you think, oh, that's interesting. That's not my usual image of Frappato. And then it kind of draws you in, I think, this particular wine. Jancis Robinson wrote something about this. Sometimes you taste a wine and you want to do two things at once, is what she said. You want to clear the room, sit down, and focus all your attention on the pleasure of this wine. And at the same time, you want to invite all your friends round and start to share the wine with them. So I think that gives a little bit of the indication. It's intriguing. It's not heavy going, but it has some other dimensions to it. I'm just going to taste it too. So for me, on this wine, you get none of that residual sugar that you sometimes get with, none of that sort of, it's not exactly residual sugar, but it's an impression of that. But this one is completely dry. It feels dry, it feels savoury, it feels a more serious style frappato. Again, I think there's a theme comes out in all of these wines, which incidentally, I have to say, is a great selection. And I can be completely objective about that because I didn't really know this selection until I came yesterday to taste some of these wines. And I think there's a kind of theme of people pushing boundaries a little, taking a few chances, doing something a little more extreme with dedication in order to get the best that they can out of this variety, in order to also express something about their image or their impression of how they want to make the wine, which I think makes for a very characterful and interesting list.
Kamil, again, you're an ambassador for KOS in
Yes,
Poland,
that was
officially.
my second time, thank you. I had the pleasure to have the KOS in my restaurant, the older vintage of Terrazzo di Vittoria, because we still have 2000 vintage, 2006 and 97. And then even older vintage really going well, they're perfectly drinking at the moment. So that's why, the Frappato which we have now, 2016 vintage, is really drinkable at the moment. I will not recommend it to keep it longer. Even now, I will serve it slightly chilled till 14, 15 degrees to keep the freshness and a great acidity in the wine. There is a wine which helps us with the one very extremely Polish dish, which is a beef tartar, because normally people in Poland drink a vodka with that, just shot of vodka, and they don't enjoy the beef tartar and the vodka. But in our all restaurants, if I'm correct, I know that in Kieliszki na Hożej and in Kieliszki na Próżnej serve the beef tartar with horseradish, with frappato, and I'm doing the same. I like this because, of course, the tartar is basic on the red meat. That's why we need to have something more round, more full body, but not full body about the oakiness. I mean, it's about the freshness and then like a fruit character with great and a high fruit level in the wine. Because the horseradish and the Dijon mustard which you have, it is quite spiciness. And that's why the level of the fruit can really great balance this. So that's a wine which is really help us to find a good way for beef tartar, and I'm really happy with that.
Thank you, Kamil. So look at the amazing story that we are living. 15 years ago, when I wrote my first wine book, Frappato was a footnote in wine encyclopedias. Okay, it was on the list, very long list of Italian grape varieties. Then it was somewhere in blends with other grape varieties. Then people started bottling it separately, and suddenly we started learning about the Frappato, and now you have Frappato in Australia, because it is becoming a grape that everybody is looking at. And this is within really 10 years, thanks to producers such as KOS. So thank you so much for this wine. And then we have another red in the glass, and we're going back to Spain for wine number 12. We are in Navarra, so this is northeastern Spain, and wine from Viña Sorsal, which is made from Graciano. Now, who is familiar with Graciano? Because this is, again, somewhere in wine books it is mentioned. I'm sure you remember one of the 4 grape varieties in Rioja. Some people in Rioja make 100% Graciano, but how many have you tasted? 3 or 4 in the best of cases, or 2? Yes, 2. Well done. That's a good result. But now you are seeing it increasingly planted and grown and bottled separately because the character is very interesting. And as often happens, the reason is a bit more technical than cultural, and the technical reason is it is a very, very late ripening grape. So 15 years ago, it was hard to ripen it, but now with global warming, this grape is giving the most balanced wine when your Tempranillo is baking in the sun. So Graciano, suddenly you become more interested. Then, of course, as we are looking for higher terroirs, we are going higher in elevation, looking for cooler places. Then we are choosing Graciano, which can ripen there. But, for example, for grapes such as Tempranillo, which is a very early ripening grape variety, 900 meters or 1,000 meters in places such as Navarra, Aragon, or Grelos near Madrid is going to be a little bit too cool. So we have this wine that is really smelling and tasting like more from the north of Europe. I would say this is, I'm sorry to be saying this, but this is a bit more in style like a French wine, because it's got those savory notes, it's pretty tannic, it's got this slightly stocky character, so it's not really what we associate with Spanish wines, which are usually, you know, rich and fat and fruity. So very interesting alternative character, and I can tell you again, is the same worldwide career as Frappato, because I have tasted a Graciano last week from Margaret River, and it was really, really interesting. And it's now being made in Portugal. It's being made in other countries. So a fascinating grape to follow, also because it's so different from the Tempranillo that dominates still in Spain.
Can I just add a little footnote to that? Because I used to be fascinated by Graciano, and this was maybe 15 years ago, asked producers, oh, you know, have you got any Graciano in there? And they would say, you know why it got the name? Because the growers found it so difficult to grow, low yields and unrewarding, well, difficult basically. Once they did ripen it, it was great, but it was low yields and hard. So they would say, Graciano, no thanks for this one.
Kamil has a few words to say about this wine.
Yeah, of course. The Graciano, of course, there's the first grapes in Navarra, because most of the wines are making from Tempranillo and Garnacha. That's why I'm really happy that we have a Zorza in our portfolio, and we can show the great way how to make the Graciano, because there is really interesting wine and you know, full body. This is generally the first line of the Graciano. We have as well another wine like Senora de Alturas and Quattro del Quattro, which show much more intense, much more full body wine. There's like a simple way, but I would love to serve it in a restaurant with just duck breast, with cherry sauce and gratin potato. We need a fatness, the fat with the duck. Over here we have a great gentle tannins, great acidity. So the wine is seriously made with the matching with the food. So well done. I don't know that is here some of the from the Viña Zorza, but well done. Well done.
I think Xavier is here from Zorzal, so you can go and taste with him later. And now let's move on to wine number 13, please, which is the next red wine glass. We're now into Portugal. Portugal and Spain, love and hate since 1,000 years. And some of the grape varieties are common, like Graciano, but this grape that you have in the glass is Touriga Nacional, which is the most emblematic wine grape from Portugal and not grown in Spain so far. But again, I think it's only a matter of time, because everybody's now looking at Touriga as being the next big thing. So Maria Castro is with us from Quinta da Pelada, and the winemaker is Álvaro Castro, which is really one of the cult winemakers in Portugal and one of the authors of the Quality Revolution in this country. And this is his top effort on Touriga Nacional, coming from Dão. Dão is a region in the center of Portugal on slightly higher elevation, very next to higher mountains, which are called Serra da Estrela, which is separating Portugal from Spain, and where also the best cheese in Portugal is made from the lovely sheep that roam there. Touriga Nacional is more popular, I think, today in the Douro, but the origin, according to the latest expertise, is actually from Dão, from this cooler wine region where it grows on granite. So granite soils are very important to Dão. And the other important hallmark of this wine is this very, very traditional method of production, because this is pressed by foot in stone basins, which are called lagares. So a technique that we associate with port winemaking, but it is actually historical throughout Portugal, and you see those granite basins in every old winery that you go and visit. And it sounds pretty extreme to press your grapes by foot. You would think it's gonna give you huge tannins, a tannic monster. Actually, the opposite is true, because there is no technology that is as soft for the extraction of tannins from the skins than your feet and hands. In ancient Greece, it was with your hands. The best wines were pressed actually in hands and with your feet, because you can never break a grape pip or a grape stalk with your feet, but you can essentially massage the skins against the stone basin, and it is giving the most voluminous but soft tannins. So this is the paradox. This wine has a lot of tannins, but they are very soft, and this is very hard to achieve. Because of the cost, producers are looking at how to replace by machine. They make what is called a robotic lagar, so a machine that is pressing, and they put some rubber feet and some porcelain feet and whatever, next thing is going to be silicone feet, but it's still not doing as good a job as a human. So look at this. We can be replaced almost everywhere, but in the lagar we still need the human beings, and it's great for the future of the wine industry. And we have this wine that is a little bit aged on the nose and the palate, which I like this evolution, because Touriga Nacional, when it's young, it's very sometimes very floral, very intensely fruity, and here we have more complexity. It's quite a meaty wine. It's quite a savory wine. I'd like to have a chunk of the nice meat at Butchery&Wine with this, maybe with some sort of barbecue element, because there's quite some smoke in the wine as well. So it might be less versatile with other foods, but with the meat you're going to have a huge amount of possibilities because of the intensity of the wine. Please put down on your map, very exciting wine region. Unfortunately, very destructive fires this year. So you were reading in the news about Napa Valley fires, but the Down was much more affected. Some wineries were completely destroyed. And it is also an ethical thing to do now, to buy a wine from the Down to help the winemakers recover. Let's move on to next wine. You have it in the glass. Oh, I have it in the glass as well, which is from France. Remy is with us from Saint-Aduc. I was at the winery last year, and Remy asked me, can you recommend a good importer? And so I did, and less than 12 months later, the wine is here at this tasting, so I'm very happy. And we have a Gigondas, which is, of course, from the southern Rhone, very near to Châteauneuf-du-Pape, but slightly higher elevation, and the terroir is a little bit different. You don't have the big stones of the Châteauneuf-du-Pape. You have more either limestone, but this wine is coming from a red soil terroir, so iron clay, I think you could say. And very traditional style for the southern Rhone. This is a blend of Grenache, Syrah, and some Cinsault old vines, very low yield bush vines. It looks like, macchia, really Mediterranean macchia. From afar, it doesn't look like a vineyard. It looks like bushes, like a scrub. Very, very low yield. You wouldn't like to produce wine there. The yield can sometimes be something like 20 hectoliters per hectare from a vineyard. And a wine is a good discussion wine, because there is a bit of the funk that Susan was referring to before. I think on some competitions, like IWC, where Susan is a panel chair, or decanter, where I judge, this wine would get rejected. There would be some judges on the panel who would say, oh, this is faulty, let's send it away. Let's open another bottle if they are being optimistic. But of course, the other bottle is going to be the same, because this is not a bottle problem. It is not a bottle fault. This is a character of the wine. So it's very meaty. It's very savory. There is, I think, a low element of bread. Would you agree, Susan? On some Saint-Aduc wines, there is a bit more. On some, there is a bit less. This is a part of the game. Like many estates in the Rhone, you have the breads in the environment, and as you know, it's a very difficult thing to control in the winery. Yeah, you have to, there's not really a way to 100% eliminate bread from your winery or from your wine, so if you have it, it's better to try to balance it, I think, with some other characters in the wine than to be obsessed with getting rid of it. Do you agree?
Well, I
find I tune into Brett, not deliberately, but sometimes I get the slightly extra dry finish, as if a little bit of the fruit has been sculpted and taken out, almost like someone's taken an ice cream scoop and taken out the fruit towards the end. So it just feels a little extra gathering dryness. It's a hard thing once when you tune into something, it's very difficult not to notice it. So, and the only thing you can do really is be true to your impressions. But this one, I think, has other things going on. And I guess that's really the balance that we're talking about, that Wojciech is talking about. Some wines, of course, the famous Chateau Massard have a lot of Brett, but they also have other things which are kind of adding to the complexity and taking you away from just focusing on what maybe many people consider a fault. So I think it's a tricky thing to balance. But something interesting I discovered recently, I had always thought that if a wine has Brett, it's going to be the same in every bottle. But that's not the case. Actually, there's quite a bit of bottle variation. So it may be that you notice it more on one bottle than another, and another somehow has managed to get less of it. So it's an interesting and controversial topic, and we have lots of discussions about that on our panels. But, it's still one. Another thing to say is that, in general, consumers like some of those characteristics. I have to say, they do like a certain element of this leathery, gamey, horsey character. I'm not getting that on this particular wine, but when it is on a wine, customers in general, people who are not involved in the trade do tend to actually like that.
Okay, I think we don't have any clinical wines on the tasting today. We don't really have any picture-perfect wines on the tasting today. We have wines with a lot of character and personality, and so they might sometimes have elements that you dislike, a bit of Brett here, some oxidation there, tannins in the white wines, but this is what they are. They are the expression of the place, the expression of a style, expression of the winemakers. The Italians have a lovely phrase that I keep using, vino d'autore, the wine of an author, and this is what we're talking about because, of course, wine at the highest level of quality is always the expression of a person, of an individual, not only of the place and the great variety, and I think a bit of Brett is just an element of the character of the Rhone wines, and we are talking about a very ancient wine region, super classic, the first that really challenged Bordeaux and Burgundy by making wines of the highest quality, at least in France. And so for me, it really fits in this wine because, as Susan said, the finish is juicy and sweet, not really that sort of drying, sweaty, unpleasant that you get when there is too much Brett. And actually, I think the leathery character or the slightly animal is a bridge to the next one that we're tasting, which is again from Italy. This is Grigiano from the Malacari winery. The grape is Montepulciano, the region is Marche. And this is a wine I have a very personal involvement with because Alessandro Starrabba saved my life when I first visited him. The story is really fantastic because I was a very poor student of Italian literature at that time, and I was hitchhiking. I was auto-stopping between wineries in the Marche region, and as I'm sure everybody who has tried knows, the moment you're trying to get a car on the road, it starts to rain. And so it rained for about 3 hours on this road that nobody was using in the Marche until there was, I think it was a doctor who very kindly drove me to Alessandro. And when Alessandro saw me coming out like a zombie, completely drenched in rain from the car, he first offered me his trousers and sweater. And then we proceeded to a wine tasting. So it was very appreciated. And so we have this very long connection, Alessandro and I. This is a great expression of the grape variety Montepulciano that I'm sure you know, but you probably are more experienced with Montepulciano d'Abruzzo, which is the version more to the south. Marche lies to the north of Abruzzo, is slightly cooler. The particularity of this terroir, Rosso Conero, is that the soil is a pure limestone. This is like essentially a huge limestone mountain on the Adriatic, and higher in elevation than most of the other vineyards. And for me, it always gives Montepulciano a little bit more freshness, a little bit more restrained. Montepulciano can tend to be a very rich, very fat, very dark, fruity wine. nice to drink when it's young, not always so much aging potential, rather immediate pleasure in the simpler versions. But now there is a lot of work going on this variety. But Alessandro was doing that work 20 years ago before anybody was really thinking about how to make a serious Montepulciano. So a very long established winery, a very long tradition, and we have this wine from Magnum that is 11 years old and it's holding great in the glass. I think it's still not completely mature, it still can continue. So that's really remarkable, because normally Montepulciano is something to enjoy within, the first 4 or 5 years. And here a lot of complexity, including some of those slightly animal tones, but I think that's okay because you've got the balsamic, more herby elements, you've got the texture really rich and oily. And one of the hidden gems of Italy, really, the Marche region, the least touristy region in Italy. You will never meet a tourist unless you go to Urbino. But in the south of Marche, there is absolutely nobody. Great value, lovely places, fantastic food, and some really interesting wines. So definitely it should be put on your radar. Thank you, Alessandro, for your help back then in 2001, and thank you for still being with us. It's great to have you. Susan, you were tasting a lot of Montepulcianos recently from Abruzzo, so how would you relate this from the market to the region that you know so well?
Well, this one is a lot more gentle, actually, in texture. It's got a lovely silky texture. I remember a lot of those wines that I tasted were quite deeply coloured. They're still very powerful wines. They tend to have high alcohol in the Collini Terramani. Not all of them, but there is a little movement as well to people experimenting with amphora, and we're going to see the Cereswola from there, which is an interesting wine later on. But I think this one is a very elegant version. I like the texture, the weight of this wine. It's not heavy-handed, it's not imposing, and it has, again, this gentle, savory finish, what we might call Moorish, in the sense you want more of it.
I think that the tannins are also a factor of a winemaker's experience. I don't know if you agree. I don't want this to be a condescending comment, but I think many wineries that are new on the market are happy to extract a lot from the grapes. They make those big tannic extracted wines, and Montepulciano can really be very tannic. But because Alessandro has been making this selection for 25 years, what was the first vintage? Nobody remembers. Yeah, 25 years. So I think really there's been the fine-tuning in the extraction, and the wine is really very balanced. We should move on, and we now have 2 mini horizontals for you, so it's going to be really interesting. We have 3 wines from Nebbiolo and 2 wines from Valpolicella. And so we start with a Barbaresco from Cascina Morassino. This is my darling, because nobody really knows about this winery. Nobody writes about it. Only the real cognoscenti and the real aficionados of Piemonte remember about Cascina Morassino, because the owner, Roberto Bianco, where is Roberto? He's the most gentle and shy of any winemaker in Italy. You've got a country of rock stars that make wine, but Roberto is really like a philosopher of wine. And so I remember visiting him during the Nebbiolo Prima. There's a big event for journalists every May, presenting the new vintage of Nebbiolo, and I was the only journalist who was actually attracted to visit this winery that is completely under the radar. Everybody else went to, Gaia and Sandrone and whatever. And so I remember we had one of the best visits ever, because, of course, Roberto had so much time for me, but also I think the quality is absolutely super top, and no wonder, because the terroir is super top. This is in the Ovello vineyard. I think it's 100% of your vineyards are in Ovello, but there are 2 wines. One is called Morassino, the other Ovello is the higher cuvée. This is the one that we are tasting now. And don't be mistaken, Ovello is one of the top vineyards for Gaia. Gaia sources a lot of his Barbaresco from Ovello. And if you know Produttori del Barbaresco, the big cooperative in Barbaresco, for me the best Riserva that they make every year is from Ovello. Some people say more maybe Rabaya, but for me this is really the best vineyard in the appellation. And we have this very classic expression of Nebbiolo, but classic not in the sense that it's unfriendly, very tannic, not really easy to drink. This is a 2015 vintage, and I could very happily drink the whole bottle. I will actually do that at lunch. maybe sharing with Roberto, because really the approach to Nebbiolo in recent years has completely changed. Winemakers are now much more precise about how they make the wine. The extraction is much more controlled. The tannins are gentler than they used to be. Of course, global warming is also playing a part because the grapes are riper. And so the old opinion that you should never drink Nebbiolo when it's young is now completely untrue. They make glorious wines to drink it young, really, even the 2015 Barbaresco. But there is also aging potential. So we have moved from a wine that was undrinkable when it was young, but great when it was old, to a wine that is great, I would say, across 15 or 20 years of age. And so it's opening a completely new world for consumers, but also for sommeliers, because they can actively use these wines in the restaurants, offering the whole character of the Nebbiolo, which is so very charming, because how many other red wines have this bouquet of flowers, of red fruits, of black fruits, spices as well, because there's quite some spice on this wine. So really, I think it's the most aromatic red wine that you can have, but also potently structured. So it allies the best of the lighter red wines, you know, like Beaujolais or Pinot Noir with the fantastic bouquet, and you take those Zalto Burgundy glasses, you know, as big as your dinner table, and you let the wine oxygenate, and it's a performance. It's an experience in itself, but also you can serve this with real food, you know, not just a salad or a piece of cheese, but you can put this, you know, with wild boar. This is what they do in... do you hunt, Roberto? Do you shoot wild boars? Cinghiale, do you shoot them? Yes, of course. Everybody in Piemonte, they hunt the cinghiale. So you can have this match that is great, but also other stuff. I was served recently sushi with Nebbiolo, and I was thinking, Jesus, this is going to be a disaster. But no, because with the tuna, you know, the fatty tuna, red fish, and juicy, acidic red wine with some tannins, that was very unexpectedly a good match. So I think a lovely expression of Nebbiolo. We meet with Susan each year in Piemonte, and so I'm curious what you think about this wine, and of course the vintage 2015 that everybody's waiting for.
I think it's a beautiful wine, actually. Again, it's got that wonderful perfume and fragrance that you hope for from Nebbiolo, and you don't always get. And I love the way that the direction that I think many of the best winemakers are moving in. The tannins are approachable. They don't have to be hard or brutal or mouth-puckering. They can be, there's plenty of them, but it's the quality and texture of them that really sets those people who make great wine apart, I think. This is a wonderful wine.
So when I go to wine classes or wine courses, in many books you can read, and I'm sorry for my Italian friends, that the main difference between Italian and French wine is that in France they have tannins management, and in Italy they still don't know what that means, which I think is often true. If you go to some places in the south of Italy or even Sangiovese in Tuscany, the tannins can be really quite tough. But taste those tannins. You could eat them with a spoon. They're fat. They're juicy. This is, for me, absolutely brilliant quality of tannins in the Morassino. The second wine from Nebbiolo that we have is from Burlotto. Fabio Alessandra is here, another of my friends from Piemonte, and I'm handing over to Susan for this Barola.
Thank you. Well, this is from a very historically famous vineyard, Monvigliero. It's the 2014 vintage, and I think these are looking so exciting, the 2014 for Nebbiolo, because a lot of wine critics have written off the 2014 in many parts of Italy, but in fact there's because Nebbiolo is late ripening, I think it's actually benefited from having a slightly cooler season. You've got more aromatic elements, and then there was a nice fine end to the vintage, and so they had the ripening they needed. So I think the idea is don't write off the whole vintage, because Nebbiolo really may be producing some great things. I've yet to go to Nebbiolo Primo and taste a whole wide range of them, but I think that will be, I'm looking forward to it. I think that's going to be great. And this one has such a beautiful nose. It's so layered. This is a wine you just want to hold it still for a while. I always think one of the signs of great wines is if you keep nosing the wine or smelling the wine and you want to go back to it and you don't want to leave it too soon, that's usually one of the great signs, because it's aromatic, it's layered, it's persistent. And as I said, this is a very famous vineyard, historically one of the most famous, like Canubi, Renati. It's in Verduno, so it makes a more elegant style Barolo. And I think these are, to me, the more elegant style Barolo are really some of the most intriguing, because everybody talks about Nebbiolo characteristics of violet, delicate red fruits, tar and roses, and rarely do you get all of those characteristics, I must say. But this is one of the wines where you do. Not only is it enjoyable, you can drink it young, but it has great capacity to age. Yesterday I tasted the 2009, which you should go and taste if you're here, and that was looking amazing, really opening up on the nose, but still plenty of life, so still very young. It's got an incredibly long maceration, 60 days. It's foot-trodden, that's right, isn't it? Yeah, foot-trodden. Again, because of that gentleness. That was always the tradition with vintage ports, for example, that you would tread them by foot because the human foot was the gentlest means of extraction. So this one, to be made in such a traditional way, and yet in a way have these very precise, aromatic, approachable qualities is just incredible, I think. So it's got that lovely character, 60 days maturation, 30 months in large Slavonian barrels, and really, you just need to taste the result.
Paweł?
Yes, that's Susan. What to say is very aromatic. It's a beautiful bouquet. In my opinion, it's the wine a little bit speechless. If you would like to imagine what is the finesse and what is the elegance, that's the best example of that. So, yeah, absolutely great wine. So when I have the glass of Monviliero, I have much more emotion than the great Grand Cru from Burgundy. So. Great wine, Fabio. Thank you.
So the next wine, I think it's my lucky day today, because then I get to talk about Vaira, Barolo, Bricco di Viola. And this was one of the first wines I fell in love with in Barolo, because, again, it has this beautiful aromatic precision, clearly defined, delineated aromas, and this lovely exuberant quality that is a bit of violet character, which you always hope for, and rarely find, but this one really has it in abundance. And I love, actually the name, Bricco is the top of the vineyard, and Viola is violets. And I was talking to them yesterday, and they were telling me that there are actually violets in bloom on that hillside at certain times. So Isadora, so it's a wonderful, they make wonderful wines. I think they're very approachable. I love this particular vineyard. 2014 was a good year for them because it's cooler than average. It allowed a gentle, slow, aromatic development. The vineyard is just outside the town of Verona, a bit higher up. And this is one that, when I was talking to Isadora yesterday, he said, kind of taught his father how to make wine, or they exchanged, the vineyard and his father kind of had some exchange, and he realized that for their particular vineyards, they would make these more ethereal, aromatic wines rather than some of the more extracted, powerful wines. But I just think they make beautifully elegant wines with huge appeal. And based on these couple of 2014s, I'm really looking forward to tasting a lot more of that vintage.
I will say some 2 words about the Barolo. I'm really happy to have wines by G.D. Vajra on our portfolio because he's my favorite producer. And as most of the sommeliers who are serving the wine, they know that I'm the really Nebbiolo drinking, and even one bottle of Barolo will be waiting for me in my house. After the tasting, I will finish the bottle, so I promise. In G.D. Vajra, I love the fruitiness because all of the wines, even from Langerosso until Bricco della Viora or even Barberas, have the really great fruit. The fruit is like the first line of the wine. He's not the modern style, he's not like old style. He's something in the middle, which I really personally like. All of the wines, even the 2014 vintage of Barolo, which is supposed to be is not drinkable at the moment, the shows very freshness, great acidity, fruity. There is, even you can drink now the wine which was just, the 4 years ago, we started the harvest. So that's very impressive, and I'm really happy that we can taste these wines together. Great wine is there. And of course, just to say about the restaurant, because in Butchery&Wine, from 7 years, generally from the beginning, we serve the Barolo by the glass. We have so many different producers, some Cogno, we have Burlotto, but now, from several years, we have a Barolo by, probably Barolo Albe, sometimes we change into the Bricco delle Viole, but we are really happy to serve it by the glass in the restaurants. And the Barolo by G.D. Vajra, it's really great piece of meat. Personally, I like the dry aged entrecote with Madeira sauce to balance the fruitiness in the wine. So if somebody would like to try, so please come to Butchery&Wine tonight. I know that somebody comes, so you'll have a pleasure to do it. Thank you.
The Vajra winery is really all about the family. The whole of the family is involved in making the wine and selling the wine. Isidoro, who is with us, is now the 3rd generation. Aldo and Milena are still very active. For me, they embody what is really important about those small, well, not so small, because Vajra is now over 60 hectares. They have grown quite a bit, but they still retain the feel of a small family estate. This is all about the dedication of the people there. And again, when we talk about style, all the three Nebbiolos that we tasted are traditional, more or less, in style. Morosino, Burlotto maybe the most, and Vajra as well. But for me, this is really a Vajra style because it doesn't adhere to any rules or any specifications that we can formulate in books. They have fine-tuned this style. They are using some small oak, for example, for the Barbera that they make, but for the Nebbiolo it's mostly large oak. But the wines are a bit less tannic and structured than many others. They are very approachable in its youth. Like Kamil said, they're really very fruity, which is something that rarely you would say about really orthodox traditional Barolo wines. So every bottle is really a bottle of Vajra, and then it is a bottle of Nebbiolo, and then it is a bottle of Barolo. And that for me is very important because we all, as consumers and journalists and sommeliers, want to connect with the people who make the wine. We don't just want a red wine, or we don't just want a glass of Barolo. We want a Barolo that is made by a person and that has a story behind it. And the story behind the Vajra family is just amazing. I wish we had more time to tell about Aldo taking part in the 1968 revolution and being sent by his dad to the countryside to stay quiet. And this is how he started his winemaking career. So you see little bits that really make up a great story. And our next two wines are also taking great stories of the Valpolicella appellation in Veneto near Verona. And the story today on the market of Valpolicella is really of an amazing success worldwide because especially Valpolicella Ripasso, but also Amarone, is one of the best-selling wines anywhere in the world. The appellation is growing, it's making billions of euros. But then you have families who really emphasize making wine in the more historical style, and that's for me very interesting, and it's the interest of these two Amarones that we are tasting now. The first is your number 19, so it's Calabionda Ravazzol, vintage 2012, a hot vintage, a dry vintage, very highly rated, very interesting wines, easy to approach,
in their youth. I'm positive about their development, their aging potential, because the structure and concentration is there. So we have a wine, just to remind everybody, made from dried grapes, essentially from raisins or semi-raisined grapes. They dry for about 3 months. The minimum is, I think, 90 days. But for traditional estates, it's a bit longer, usually until February, January, February. And you lose about 40 to 50% of the mass before you press, and then you press the wine, and it ferments very slowly. Of course, very high alcohol, potential alcohol. Some Amarones can have a bit of residual sugar because the fermentation will stop, or producers want it to stop because, of course, it's the trick of making slightly sweeter Amarone today. Not the case with Calabionda or Meroni, the two producers that we have here. These ones are purely traditional. And for me, the interest of this wine is that we live in an age of immediate wines. We want wines for immediate consumption. At best, if it's the latest vintage, that's especially true for white wines. Aging is not really a proposition. Even very good restaurants don't really have the space to age the wines. Producers, they don't have the money to age the wine. So this becomes one of the problems. The other problem is that we are obsessed with alcohol. I don't know about your countries. I wish you luck, but in Poland, it is a disaster. Alcohol is going to be completely forbidden very soon, I'm sure. So a wine that has 16% alcohol, or even a bit more in the case of this vintage, I think, it's very hard to propose. And if people come to the restaurant and you give them a wine with 16%, they are just going to run away. Some of them want to drive back home, even if they don't tell you when they book a table. So the miracle of good Amarone for me is that the wine manages to taste really light and really balanced, despite having the highest dry extract in the world of red wine, because it's 45 or more. The highest alcohol of any normal wine, apart from Primitivo, sometimes a bit of sugar, a lot of oak aging, so there is a bit of oxidation. So this is not a wine that we Burgundy lovers should normally like, okay? The Pinot Noir collectors among us, so we are not supposed to be enjoying this style, but it's great. When it's well made, it's really a fantastic wine. So for me, it's the miracle that something not supposed to be happening is really happening well. And it's thanks to producers like Calabionda, because commercial Amarone is one of the really bad wines in this world. If you go to the supermarket and you buy a 10 euro bottle of Amarone, it is going to be all the bad things that I mentioned and not a single nice thing. So, lovely wine, and my special thanks go to those two producers for still using the forbidden grape variety Molinara that everybody is now uprooting because it is giving essentially a rosé wine. But in the old times, it was used to add a little bit of acidity and a little bit of finesse to the Amarone and Valpolicella. So big commercial wineries, they are eliminating Molinara, and they are campaigning for Molinara to be taken out of the rules for Valpolicella. But the traditional producers will still use some. I think Meroni, the next wine, number 20, has about 10% of Molinara, yes? 10%? 12. Here we go. The highest percentage of Molinara in any Amarone. You can see, if you want to know whether a producer is making traditional Amarone, you ask them how much Molinara. If they say, what is Molinara? I never use it, then this is already an answer. Meroni is this absolutely fantastic winery that is obstinating in making wine like 30, 40, 50 years ago, before the quality revolution, but also before the style revolution in Italian wine, with all the big critics coming in, and Parker and Suckling, Wine Spectator and Gambero Rosso, who were promoting big black fruit juices with a bit of tannins in them. Meroni is making wine. If you went to a good Verona restaurant in 1968, I think you could get a glass of this style. Maybe not the quality. I think the quality is now a little bit higher, but because of all the meticulous attention that Carlo is giving. But I think it was more or less this style. And for me, very, very important, the aging. This is a wine for time. And it's not about primary fruit. It is not about freshness. It is about complexity. It is about nuances. It is about unusual aromas, because we have a lot of tobacco in this wine, for example, and you never get tobacco in a young red wine. It doesn't exist because it is a tertiary note that is coming from the oxidation of some compound. And so when you speak to young drinkers, they have never had a wine that smells of tobacco. And they say, oh, wow, a wine can smell of tobacco. Well, every old red wine has a bit of a tobacco note, but you just never drink those wines anymore. And you also have, for me, this interplay on the palate between crisp, sweet, and bitter. Very important. And old wines, old vintages, the glorious wines of the past, they always had those elements in them, okay? Now, then we moved on to mostly making sweet tasting wines, because people have a very sweet tooth now. They don't like sour, they don't like acidity. That, thankfully, is changing now. So we see a lot of consumers moving on to acidic wines, but bitter remains a problem. Proposing something that has a bit of bitterness is a problem. Amarone is always a little bit bitter. The name means bitter because it was first made as a bitter recioto. They had a sweet wine, Recioto della Valpolicella, sweet red wine, and when it fermented a little bit longer, almost to dryness, they called it Recioto Amarone, which meant a bitter Recioto. I love bitter tastes in food and in wine, and we should have more of it. I think it's a very noble taste. It's a very noble flavor. Great cuisine often has a bit of bitterness, and great wine should have. Think about sherry. Think about older champagnes. Think about really aged white Burgundy. Old Chablis. It has those almonds. Slightly mushroomy notes of the bitterness. So. My thanks to Carlo. I raise my glass to Carlo for resisting the temptation to change. It's always great to change, but sometimes it's great to stay the same. This is the last wine of this session, and I think now everybody is waiting for the coffee break, mostly the sommeliers, of course. So thank you for the service, brilliant service to the sommeliers. We are only about 45 minutes late, but that's nothing, no worries. So can I suggest we convene again in about 10 minutes for the second session today. Thank you. Everybody good? Coffee was nice. I love the taste of Sauvignon Blanc after coffee, do you not? You don't get the cat pee so much, you get more of the melon. So I think it's great to have a bit of coffee before the next wine. And we are now going to France. To the Loire Valley, and a very interesting wine because nobody knows this region, and so I always love presenting those appellations that are very confidential, like Cheverny. We have Thierry Delaye here with us today. Thierry, I don't think, yeah, hi, great to meet you. Now Cheverny, if you are into history, is one of the most historical winemaking zones in France. It was much more important than Bordeaux in the Renaissance because it's very near Paris. It's actually between Orléans and Tours. And the kings of France were drinking this wine for 500 years before any drinkable wine was made in Bordeaux. And the particularity of this area is that they can make very good white, rosé, and red. I think you could make very good sparkling wine, but I think nobody has started yet. But my feeling is that you could make good crémant. Now, the red wines are made from Pinot Noir, and try them later. But now we are tasting a white wine, and it is the only white wine in France made from a blend of Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay. Normally, as you know, you're not supposed to blend these two grape varieties, but some people do. They do in Australia, they do in Italy. We've had a Chardonnay Sauvignon today. And this wine is 85% Sauvignon and 15% Chardonnay, no oak. And the reason for the blend is that geographically we are essentially between Chablis and the Loire appellations that make Sancerre and Pouilly-Fumé. And the terroir is a little bit similar to some of the Upper Loire because there are some sandy soils as well as clay. So very unusual combination. I think you will get a lot more Sauvignon Blanc from this wine because it's 85% of the blend, but 15% is Chardonnay, and they normally say it's Chardonnay for the texture. I think it is also adding a sort of slightly more orchard fruit character, apple and pear, to the more melon and, of course, green character of the Sauvignon Blanc. There is another reason to go and visit this appellation. Two more reasons to visit this appellation. One, that you have the best castles in France. Château de Blois is very near, which is one of the most magnificent examples of Renaissance architecture. The other reason is that they have a unique grape variety, Romorantin. Only, I think, 30 hectares left, but again, getting talked about quite a lot now at the moment. And you can taste it's bottled as Cours Cheverny. It's a different appellation to Cheverny. But for me, the interest of this wine is that we are really tasting this very deeply ingrained, this very old traditional wine culture of France. Really, French wine is not so much about the Rhone Valley or Bordeaux. I mean, the really old French wine culture. Has a lot to do with the Loire, because the Loire was always belonging to the kings of France, unlike Bordeaux, which was English for a long time, unlike Burgundy, which was trying to kill France for hundreds of years before they failed. So Loire is really the deep France, and the culture there is fantastic, because all those estates, they go back often generations and generations. You can see buildings that are 300 years old, cellars that are 500 years old, and many interesting grape varieties. So please have a look at the Cheverny. And Paweł has championed this wine in his restaurant.
Yes, I'm very like the Cheverny is very refreshing wine, so it's easygoing, fruity. So we serve very often for the aperitif or some spring vegetables. Like at the moment, you have the season for the asparagus, so it's perfectly matched with the asparagus, which I very like this combination. And as I said, it's really citrusy in flavor, nice, refreshing acidity. So it's easygoing and everyday drinking wine. So,
great minds think alike, and it's interesting what you say it's about asparagus, because many people, when they pair wine with asparagus, they put very acidic white wines. They put pure Sauvignon Blanc or things like this, which I like. But if you go to Germany, which is the biggest asparagus culture, they are not so keen on having high acidity with asparagus, and they serve, for example, Sylvaner, which is a softer acidity, slightly more extract with the asparagus. This is the classic match when you go to Germany. In Austria, which is another big asparagus hub, it's often Welschriesling, and Welschriesling can have high acidity, but sometimes it's a more textured, rich wine at mid-palate, not aromatic. And so it's interesting that you would choose this wine, which has the Chardonnay element to round off the Sauvignon with the asparagus. We now move on to 3 Grand Cru white wines, and I'm super happy to present them in a series, because this is going to be completely fascinating. And the first is coming from Alsace, which has the same historical, very deeply ingrained wine culture as Loire, but it's just not all French, it's a strong Germanic element. And we have André Ostertag, the producer of this wine, and Thomas Larmoyer is with us. And it's really an honor to present this new vintage of Riesling Münchberg, one of the great wines of Alsace. This is a Grand Cru, but it is a real Grand Cru. It's not like the rubbish Grand Cru from Alsace that are made by cooperatives for the supermarket, but this is the real thing. This is an absolutely brilliant vineyard, high-perched, 275 meters above sea level. And as I'm sure you know, Alsace is very complicated geologically. You've got 15 or 20 different soil types. But this is, for me, the most typical Alsace terroir, which is the sandstone, pink sandstone. Be careful, because there are many different sandstones and they don't like to be mixed up. Gray sandstone doesn't like to be called pink, and the pink doesn't like to be called white. So this is the Grès de Vosges, which is giving the wines that incredible lightness of touch. They seem to be almost ethereal, but they are big wines. They have big structure. They can age for very long. But the grass, the sandstone is giving them this sort of lightness of aromatics, a slightly spicy touch. So for me, they are like the
those guys who walk on poles very high, you know, they walk on a line. This Riesling is very filigree. It's got this, you know, low alcohol, high acidity, but it manages to taste substantial. It's very aromatic and very mineral as well. Ostertag has introduced this classification of wines. I think everybody should adopt it. They divide their wines into vin de fruits, so fruit wines, vin de pierre, stone wines, and vin de temps, which is time wines. And so this belongs to the stone wine classification, and I think this is spot on because there is a lot of fruit, but a lot of minerality as well. Kamil?
So I'm really happy to speak about the Ostertag wines. There's like a natural producer from Alsace. I read the article that the first vines was planted in the 12th century on the Mönchengladbach, so that's quite really interesting. The vines was really long time here. For me, in the restaurant, I always serve this wine with classic French dish, which is foie gras. We make the foie gras terrine with Maldon salt on the top and caramelized apple and the homemade brioche. It's really going well. Of course, the wine seems to be quite lighter because of the color, but it's very rich and intense in the palate. There is a residual sugar. I don't know the percent, how many grams is on the wine, but there is a bit residual sugar which goes very well with the caramelized apple. And the foie gras, which is very fat and acidity and releasing, going well cut through the fatness, so that's really good match, which I really like to serve in a restaurant.
Where is Thomas? How much sugar in this wine? 3 grams. It tastes sweeter than 3, which is interesting, but I often get this impression from Alsace wines because they are a little bit riper. The fruit is a bit riper, but also I think there is an interesting element in this wine that you showcase so well. It's very balanced, but in Alsace there is sometimes a little bit of deliberate oxidation in the style. You know, if we look at the other great Rieslings that we have in the world, German, Austrian, and Australian, they are most often made in a very reductive style, you know, very active reduction, SO2 from the beginning to preserve the fruit and the freshness. Not always, but I think it's the rule. Alsace is a different tradition. Often the wines are made in the large oak. Deliberately there is a bit of oxidation. Sometimes they come on the market a little later as well. And for me, this is emphasizing the sweetness of the fruit and the texture. They are less tight and they seem less acidic, and so it lets the fruit express itself more freely in this sort of ripe, plump way, even though, you know, this wine is relatively low in alcohol for Alsace. So it's a very distinctive style, and this is what is great about Alsace. It always tastes of Alsace, and that's great. And Münchberg always tastes of Münchberg, and this is why we have those Grand Crus. They have to have a character and a personality that are unique. And now it is a contrast. I think it's quite a contrast. The wine from Germany, from Pfalz, coming from Reichstadt von Bohl, which is another super historical winery going back to the 19th century and used to be one of the most expensive and prestigious wines in the world, costing more than Chateau Latour or Lafite at the end of the 19th century. And now it's enjoying a fantastic revival under the directorship of Richard Grosse, our friend from Germany. And I have selected one of their Grand Crus, so Grosses Gewächs, Ungeheuer. Now, Ungeheuer, there are several Grand Crus that people would say are maybe even more famous, like Pechstein in the same area, but I think Ungeheuer is very special. In a way, it's, for me, the most typical wine of that area, and it is a historical cru, but when back in history, it was 3 hectares extension, and now it's 29. So there is what we call the democratization of Grand Cru, so that everybody can have a little bit, including your cousin and your hairdresser. They all want to be owners in the Grand Crus. But the real stuff is coming from this little parcel. So I think there's only a few thousand bottles, Richard, right? 3,000-4,000 bottles of this wine? 3 hectares. It's a bit more. Again, large oak aging. Similar winemaking actually to Ostertag. It is a large oak, no sugar, 0.7. Try to find a drier Riesling on this planet than this. Wow. But this is really now the style of von Bohl, because they are going very much into this direction, bone dry wines for restaurants, for fine food.
But the expression is very different from Alsace, even though I think crows fly. It's not so far from Münchberg. Yeah, it's about, what, 15 kilometers or something? A bit more maybe. But really very close, because it's on the other side of the Rhine. It's the neighboring region, even though we think, one is France and the other is Germany, but historically a lot of connection. So the expression here is interesting because the wine is very young, 2016, but for me it's very open. It's not really tight, it's not really reserved, as many Rieslings are at this age. I get even some buttery notes of maturity, so good winemaking, because Mathieu Kaufmann, who is the enologist, is preparing this wine well before bottling, so there is no dump phase, there is not a problem. Everybody who goes to Germany knows that the wines are served too young in the restaurants. Often it's impossible to buy an older vintage. It's now changing a little bit, but it used to be that you could only drink 2017 in the restaurants now. It's a German disease. I call it the German disease. Austria is the same. I'm sorry for you guys. You need to put more wine aside because it's nice to drink those wines with 2 or 3 years of age. Interesting contrast of styles. There is some similarities, some differences, and it's wonderful to have those two Grand Crus together. And we now have the Riesling of the South, which is the Viognier. You will laugh when I call Viognier the Riesling of the South, but certainly for the aromatic expression, you could use this comparison. And we are going through the Rhone Valley, northern Rhone. We were in the south of the Rhone before Rigy-Gondas with Saint-Aduc, and now is the north. And this is Condrieu. So this is the appellation where the grape Viognier was probably born, or certainly this is the hub of the Viognier, and this is where it almost died, because as you remember in the 1960s it was less than 7 hectares, and there was a project for a big motorway to go through these vineyards, and we was probably killed the Viognier, the grape variety. Now we have thousands and thousands of hectares throughout the world. The only country that doesn't make Viognier is Poland, but I'm sure it's going to change in the next few years. Always some ambitious producers looking for the next challenge. And we have this incredible aroma. This can only be Viognier. This is the honeysuckle, the orchid flower, the lily flowers, the fruit jam, the olive oil. I almost get a note of olive oil always from Viognier in the nose. It's really great. A fantastic expression of a rare grape variety, and we have a cru from Condrieu, so there's very limited wine. They're really like tiny parcels, terraces, very hard to farm. One of the most expensive wines to make, honestly, because the yield is very low, everything is made by hand. Getting the grapes down from the vineyards to the winery, this is a challenge because it's really tough to transport. I was there last year. I couldn't believe how steep. When you take a photo from afar, it looks very pretty. Now try to climb to the top of the vineyard. Good luck. It's going to take 2 hours to walk, a few hundred meters. Very hard. Paweł, what's your comment about this Condrieu?
So I'm really like this Condrieu is one of my favorite producer of the Condrieu. And this is in fact that is one of the best producer of the Condrieu. But from the few years he make excellent Syrah as well. So the Côte Rôtie is from the past year one of the outstanding as well. But we have the excellent Condrieu at the moment in the glass, so very powerful, very full body white wine. That's what Wojtek say. We have the aroma of the olive oil, but as well the very classic stone fruits flavor, like the ripe peach, some apricot as well. So I'm really like to pair this wine with the vegetables, which are very often hard to choose the correct wine. So that goes very well with the caramelized carrots or with some pumpkin as well. So that's for the caramelized with a bit of the sweetness from the vegetables works very well.
This is a great terroir wine, and remember that the real keepers of the terroir are the great winemakers. So, Condrieu is this unique place. The wines are very expensive, and so
when you look at it in abstract, you think, oh, why does a white wine has to cost 70 euros or 80 euros? Because some of them really are on this price level. Then you go, you see the vineyards, you understand the amount of work, handwork that it takes, the dedication, and you understand that the price is justified, and those vineyards would have disappeared if not for the 5 or 6 families who really saved it from oblivion. So for me, this is always worth paying a premium to ensure that we keep having Cordelier in the future. And it's the same about every great appellation in the world, and never enough emphasizing this. Also to those of you in the room who are reselling the wines to your customers, price is always to be put in context, and the price of an expensive wine like these 3 that we have tasted, the 2 Rieslings and the Condrieu, is never an accident. It's not really about the margin, it's about also the cost of production, and we want to keep those wines for the future. Now we move on to 2 rosé wines, and we have selected these with Susan because we love rosé and we want everybody to drink more rosé. We want rosé to be taken seriously. So more people are drinking rosé, but there is still a little bit of snobbery about pink wine, completely unjustified, I think. And so we have selected 2 interesting wines, both from Italy. But the first that you have is from Apulia, from Mocavero. So hello to Francesco, who is the producer of this wine. And the reason I selected this, because I think very seriously Salento in the south of Puglia is making the best rosé that money can buy. Now Provence, of course, is the big region for rosé, but I think the south of Apulia has an edge because they've got grape varieties for making rosé, mostly Negro Amaro, as in this wine, but I also very much like, for example, Bombino as a grape variety for the rosé. And the other reason is the sunshine and the climate, and it's really a fantastic place because there's so much ventilation from the Adriatic and the Ionian Sea, very healthy grapes, a lot of organic viticulture because really not much disease pressure, and the expression of these rosés is just fantastic. Did you want to add something to this pink, Susan?
I think just to say that, rosés have become super popular from following a sort of Provence style. And they are the sort of the paler the better as far as the market seems to be concerned. But I really feel, thank you, I really feel that is a bit misguided as a trend because it's purely based on colour. I've done actually lots of tasting. We happen to have lots of these wines this year in the International Wine Challenge. They can be actually quite neutral. If you had them in black glasses, you would probably think they might be white wines. They're very low in aromatics, and really they're sold partly on colour, partly on presentation and packaging. I'm not saying there aren't some lovely wines, but in general, there's a lot of wines that are less than lovely, a bit more ordinary. So it's exciting for me to have 2 Italian rosés, which have a bit more character and personality. And really, when we're judging wine, we don't care about colour. We just judge purely on aromas and flavour. We're not sort of taken in by the sort of snobism, really, for the paler the better. Actually, sometimes the opposite is true. So we're judging it more as a complete wine in terms of aroma, flavours, etc.
Yeah. Darker rosé, please. Let's make that a trend, not the paler. I like some of the pale from Provence, but there should be a pluralism as well in the rosé. And just as well as it was completely mistaken to judge very dark red wines by the color in the past, everybody now knows this, so I hope we're going to follow with the rosé. So this was from Salento, and now we have this even more unusual rosé style from Abruzzo.
So, Ceresuolo di Abruzzo. Is Francesco here? Is he in the room today? Francesco Girelli? No. He was here yesterday and I had a good chat to him. I think he's done a great job with this wine because he, Montepulciano is so hard to not get a very, very deep, intense colour. And he's managed to get, the Ceresuolo di Abruzzo rosés are meant to be a deep colour, But this one, relatively, has got this dark cherry, but it's got a lovely kind of extra dimension to it. It was becoming a very popular trend in Abruzzo when I was there last time, in the sense that the local Italians were deciding to opt for this dry, fuller-bodied, more characterful rosé with their Sunday night pizza. Whereas before, that never used to be heard of. You would always have pizza and beer, and that would be the classic combination. So I was pleased to see that, at least on the home market, there was a strong interest for these more traditional style rosés. And some of those rosés were some of the most interesting wines there. So this one is a little bit different because Francesco said he wanted to put his interpretation on a classic style. It's fermented in amphora. So it has a very short time on skins, 4 hours skin contact, and then moved into a 1,000-litre amphora, where it's racked a couple of times because it can have a tendency to develop reductive characters, and given 9 months in amphora. And this is because, there is also a great fashion for using amphora. I think the Tuscany market's doing very well on this. Another kind of trend, if you like, but I think with good reason, because it seems to add a more textural, a roundness to the wines to allow some exchange rather than stainless steel, which can produce a very neutral, flatter style. So this is one of those examples, and it's got a more serious style to it on the palate. It's savory, dry, it'd be delicious, chilled. I can see that going with lots of different things. And, this is, I hope this trend makes it to the export markets and achieves some success.
I think we're seeing a bit more of this diversification of rosés, because you're seeing deeper Grenache styles. Tavel has always been popular, but now producers in Australia or California are looking to make those really deep rosés, essentially light reds. And you see a very interesting trend in rosé Burgundy. Now, there is one appellation in Burgundy that has the right to make a village rosé, which is Marsanais. And some of these wines are absolutely lovely. I love them, and it's a great expression of Pinot Noir, lighter than the reds, but just as territorial, just as terroir-driven. Now, speaking of terroir, there is no more of a terroir wine, paradoxically, than Lambrusco, because people think it's a technical wine. It's a frizzante red. It's a sparkling red. It's made by computers, so you just put your grapes in the machine, and it delivers the finished wine in a bottle after a few months, just like you make prosecco. This is the image that many people have. Actually, not, because if we define terroir as the combination of grape and place equals style, there is nothing more territorial than Lambrusco, because Lambrusco is only made in one place in the world, one place in Italy, and this is a completely unique style. Nobody else makes a sparkling, dry red in this style in the world, and I'm very happy to experience a Lambrusco revolution. Everybody now getting really excited about the potential of these wines, whereas when I first wrote an article about Lambrusco in 2006, I was getting ridiculous emails. What are you talking about? The Coca-Cola wine. I thought you were a serious wine critic. This was literally an email I got in 2006. So I'm happy that this is changing, because my first discovery of Lambrusco was on the field when I was eating a plate of pasta. And a guy in the restaurant in Modena suggested that I should have a glass of Lambrusco. And I said, okay, the local wine, fine. And it was absolutely gorgeous. So I never actually got the negative associations of Lambrusco before I tasted my first glass, which is probably what you should do. And so let's give to our children a glass of Lambrusco tonight without telling them what it is, so that they get the first experience of a great wine without having all the negative stereotype around us. And we are tasting one of the seriously great Lambrusco, so I hand over to Susan for this.
So, Fattoria Moretto. Is Alessio here? Yep, there you are. Okay. So this is a family business making a more serious style Lambrusco. That's not to say it isn't enjoyable, because it is. I think sometimes there's a bit of a prejudice in the wine world that if a wine is too enjoyable, it can't be great. I think we should get rid of that prejudice straight away, because wines should be first and foremost enjoyable. We should want to drink them. They shouldn't be hard work. You know, I think the last thing you want, you come home and say, no, let me take a knife and fork to this wine. You want something that's going to be friendly. And this one is Lambrusco Grasparosso di Castelvetro, the only DOP that's where the vines are grown on the hillsides. Very old vineyard. This is a single vineyard, Canova, planted in less than 2 hectares, which was planted in 1971. And pretty low yields to go with this. It's been organically certified since 1996. And the number of bottles varies from year to year, of course, with the vintage changes, but between 7,000 and 8,000 bottles. So small production. And I mean, I think this is a really deliciously drinkable wine, but not simple. It has some personality, it has some character. And just to tell you a little anecdote for a moment, I was with a really nice friend of mine who you may have heard of, Gérard Basset. He's one of the rare people in the wine world that's a master sommelier and a master of wine, and also got an MBA and an OBE now as well. So the most highly qualified you could imagine. We were in Bordeaux for the Emprunteur, and we'd had a series of wonderful dinners, of course, with Cru Classé Bordeaux. We decided to meet just for an evening, a night off, and guess what we had? We decided to have a pizza and Lambrusco, because that combination just gave us so much joy and pleasure, and, you know, it was really lovely. And I think these wines do go well with the Bolognese, with the wonderful cuisine that you get. So I think they're not to be sniffed at. To coin an expression, they're really wines to consider, you know, taste them, give them a try.
Yeah, and I think so. We in Poland, we need to work more on the Lambrusco because of the similarity of the cuisine, what they have in the Emilia-Romagna. So we have if you have the place with the traditional Polish cuisine, a lot of fat or a lot of cold cuts or handcrafted, very high quality sausage. So the Lambrusco work very well, and I think so it will be great to serve the glass of Lambrusco with the Polish sausage, for example.
We can make the pork alliance between Emilia and Poland. Our next 2 wines come from Etna, so we have another horizontal, mini horizontal, and Susan, the first is the Biondi Otis Rosso.
Yes, I mean, Etna, as we've already talked about, is really super trendy at the moment. The hot topic from a cooler area. It's such an intriguing, whenever you talk to any winemakers or grape growers there's always a sort of special light in their eyes when they're growing vines on Etna, because the land is so distinctive. And, you know, if you haven't been there, it's one of the places you really should go, to the vineyards. So these wines are intriguing, lively, full of energy. Both of these wines are really interesting, lively, alive wines. Also, last year's Master of Wine exam, there was an Etna wine, as well as a Barolo and a Chianti, and many people, several people thought that the Etna wine could be Nebbiolo. So because of some elements of that liveliness, that sort of lighter body sometimes with that good acidity and a little grippiness to the tannins. Ciro Biondi is on the southeastern slopes. Utis is the name, and this was stemmed from a very modest desire, if you like. It's based on the story of Odysseus, who, when the Cyclops was blinded, asked him, "What's your name?" And he said, "Nessuno," so nobody. But they couldn't use that name, so they changed it to the Greek version of Utis. So really they were saying, we're nobody, but we just want to be here to celebrate this land and to restore the vineyards, really, of their family. This is a field blend, so likely to be 80% Nerello Mascalese and 20% Nerello Cappuccio. And really, I think you see a lot of this liveliness and vitality in these wines. There's also a slight kind of delicate red fruits. You can see why people may think under pressure it has some connection with nib, because you've got that lovely delicate red fruit character as well. But plenty of tenacity and edge on the palate. So again, these long, savory finishes, a bit of grip from the tannins, and you really feel that this wine can take on lots of different dishes.
I think you could easily mistake this for Nebbiolo, and I perfectly understand people who do, because you know, between the Burlotto today and this wine, many similarities. You know, the color is similar, the tannic structure is similar. I think maybe the Barolo is a little bit fresher in the aromatics, while this is slightly more Mediterranean. You know, you've got slightly more dried fruits, more savory notes, but really there is a communication, and it's fascinating to learn that several Barolo producers are now investing on Etna, buying vineyards or getting into joint ventures. One is Gaia, but for example also Giovanni Rosso, an excellent producer from Serralunga d'Alba. He's also starting production on Etna. So there's going to be more than superficial contacts. And fascinatingly, Sicily and Piemonte were united under the Savoy kings for a brief time in the 18th century. So there is even a cultural connection between these two appellations, even though, you know, it's more than 1,000 kilometers between the two. The second wine is also from Etna, but it's Passo Pisciaro. I think everybody now has it in the glass.
So Passo Pisciaro, this is really one of the wines that brought about the renaissance of Etna wines. And Andrea Franchetti and Carlo Franchetti are really added great enthusiasm and marketing skills, as well as their commitment and investment. And this kind of helped to bring about a renaissance of Etna wines, really. And I think that this is their 100% Nerello Mascalese. They were the first to start looking at contrada, so the individual vineyard sites. And this adds another layer of interest and complexity, a bit like Grand Cru system in Burgundy with individual vineyard sites. Of course, it means there's more to learn, more to discover, but then with all great wine regions, you do need those layers, somewhere for people to go, these layers of complexity. So I had a fascinating tasting with them, where they very generously opened a lot of different contrada wines, and, you know, kept me busy for at least a few hours, a couple of hours, trying to work out some of the differences between the contrada. They also started the Anteprima, the contrada event, which is which happened on the 23rd of April this year, which is a kind of where all the producers are encouraged to go and show their wines. And I believe it's still very informal, in the sense that everybody's encouraged to come along and taste in a very open way. So that already is very forward-looking, sharing ideas, sharing experiences. And this has, I've just tasted this one, it has this beautiful, lovely, pure fruit in the middle as well. Again, this sort of delicate red fruit, which is carried by their sort of tenacious structure. They're energetic, lively wines with a lot of elegance.
Recently spoke to a colleague who said, you know, Etna has peaked. There's too much interest about Etna. There are so many other great terroirs in Italy, even in Sicily. And with this, I partly agree, because I wish people were speaking more about Cerasuolo di Vittoria, for example, than they do at the moment. But I also think Etna hasn't definitely peaked. I think Etna is only really just starting. The same could be said about Barolo in a way, because Barolo is today at a great moment of its history, with so many great producers and quality across the board. But I would be watching Etna more closely, because we are only really getting more understanding of the terroir now. You know, the high and the low, the north and the east, and sometimes a little bit of the south. I think we're getting into more, you know, some of the experiments are coming
along now with the single vineyard vinification, blends, grape varieties. We really now understand why traditionally this was a blend, because Nerello Mascalese is great on its own, but maybe with a bit of help it's even better from other grapes. That's a little theory. And with this, we're moving smoothly to our three Sangiovese wines. Now, we have a little change of order. So we're first going to taste wine number 31, please, which is San Patrignano. Is this the order of pouring? If it's not, please, San Patrignano first. Number 31. Then we're going to taste number 30. Oh, sorry, it's 32 on your list. I've got a different list. How come? No. So
Oh, 31.
first 31, then number 30, please, and then 33, and we'll only taste the Pignolo at the end. I'm sorry about this change, but this is, you know, sometimes when you open the bottles of a wine, they speak to you differently than what you thought, and we need to slightly change the order. So we have three Sangioveses. I don't think my friend Stefano Barriani is in the room. Oh yeah, c'è Stefano, ciao. I love Stefano. He also makes some great wines in his own winery, San Giuseppe in Romagna. Have you brought any today? Do you have a bottle? No, next time. But Stefano is also the manager of San Patrignano, which is an incredibly interesting estate, because it is not really a wine estate. It is a community project in Romagna that was founded about 30 years ago, as a rehab center for drug addicts. And the idea is that they will be reintegrated into society, not by telling them what's good for them, because we all know that it doesn't work. From our own experience, or whoever has kids, a 100% failure rate. But the best thing to do is just offer these people an opportunity to work. And they can work in many different fields. At San Patrignano, they have award-winning horses. They have award-winning guide dogs for blind people. They make phenomenal cheese. But I think the most interesting part from my point of view is the wine, because they make really great wine. So those people who have no experience in viticulture or winemaking, they learn to grow grapes and make wine, and the result is great. So apart from being really good wine, it is also ethical wine. Most of the wine that we taste today is ethical because it comes from small farmer families who have been working for generations in their terroirs, and they don't spread Roundup around the vineyard from morning to evening. But this has got a special ethical aspect, because you are really helping this amazing project, one of the most worthwhile projects in the world of wine, and the complete opposite of the corporate ownership and mergers and takeovers and, you know, business sharks eating each other. This is making a difference in society. And I think it's very important that we think about this aspect. Really important for this wine. And now to the wine itself. This is 100% Sangiovese, but coming not from Tuscany, but from Romagna. Romagna is the other side from Tuscany, going to the Adriatic Sea. You could actually see the sea from the vineyards. From this vineyard, Avi, you can see the sea. This is according to some theories where Sangiovese comes from. There are some theories that Sangiovese was born in this area, or at least some of the clones of Sangiovese. So we are really tasting an expression of Sangiovese that is different from Tuscany, but very interesting. For me, the wines of Romagna, the Sangiovese di Romagna, is always a bit more tannic, is a bit more dense, more meaty than Tuscany. I would say more virile. It's more like really a horse, a race horse, very muscular, very powerful. But the fruit register is also a bit different, because for me, often more dark fruits. Sangiovese in Tuscany can go towards the red fruits and floral aspect. Often when it goes higher in elevation in Romagna, for me, often you get the mirtillo, the blueberry. You often get sometimes even the mora, the blackberry. So I love Sangiovese di Romagna when it's well made like this. There are some monster wines in Romagna, over-extracted and over-oaked, but not at San Patrignano. They make this very elegant version of Sangiovese, which I hope you liked, and I hope it's a discovery for some of you. Go taste their wines. They make also some nice whites, Sauvignon Blanc based, and they make some terrific Cabernet Sauvignon. So a reality to discover from this hidden corner of Italy. The nearest large city, Stefano, is Rimini. So you could go swimming and sunbathing within 15 minutes. I think Stefano is a fast driver, so he takes you to the sea in about 15 minutes. Normally it's about more like 35. Thank you for being with us, Stefano, and supporting Vini Affini with your great project. I love the synergy. And then the next wine that we have is a Chianti Classico. Susan is from Il Molino di Grace.
Yes, so this one is Molino di Grace, 2011, Gran Selezione. This is an interesting topic in itself because Gran Selezione has become legal in 2014 after 20 years discussion and talking about this. At first, there was quite a bit of resistance from some producers who either wanted the grand selection, so the best selection, if you like, or a bit like a Grand Vin, to be a bit more fundamental or focus on having the identity of the place, Rada, Greve, Gaole. But now I'm quite pleased to say when I talk to a lot of the producers, even those who were initially against the idea seem to be pretty positive towards it. As they said, one of them said to me, well, I play rugby, so if my captain says we go here, then we go here. So in other words, there's a bit more support for it. But this particular winery have always been in favor of this Gran Selezione because they were already doing something like that. So it's a step above the Riserva, or that's the intention. You've got the Chianti Classico, the Chianti Classico Riserva, and the Gran Selezione. It has to be made from grapes from the estate, so the grapes cannot be bought in, but it can be selections. It's not a single vineyard wine. It's a sort of top cuvée, or as I said, Grand Vin. And it's a way for Chianti to kind of establish itself much more in the framework for some of these great wines, because to some extent it's been, Chianti Classico I should say, to some extent it's been in the shadow of some of its more illustrious neighbours. Brunello is always getting a lot of attention. And really some of their top wines are supremely good and do deserve this recognition. So this one has a beautiful name. In English, it's a very pretty name, Molino of Grace. So the windmill or the mill of Grace. Grace is the family name of the American owners, but in our case, it's got that double meaning of elegance, grace, etc. And this is from Panzano, hill in the middle of the area, 220 to 350 meters. About 18,000 bottles, not necessarily of this wine. How many bottles of this wine is made typically? About 18,000, more or less. 2011 was particularly hot vintage. It's a vintage I often like in parts of Italy. It has a sort of rightness, a charm, and an immediate appeal. I did like it, for example, in Piemonte. So again, this is a really intriguing wine, and have a look at it, taste it.
I need to tell one story about this wine because I was twice in Molino di Grace. One was 2012 and the second in 2014. And 2014, Jacopo, that was your first year when you start working for a winery, if I remember correctly. That was the first time, yes, first year. And 2011, that is the second vintage of Gran Selezione, but when I came to the winery, that was 2014 vintage. Jacopo gave me for tasting 2010. I was not so optimistic about that. I said, okay, it's really good wine, but I personally prefer to have Riserva e Margone, and we finish the tasting. And after that, next day after, I tried to leave the winery, and Jacopo stopped me and said, come on, Kamil, you need to taste one more wine because, we have something really interesting for you.
That was the same bottle which was open last day. That was the same bottle of Gran Selezione 2010. And I say, come on, I don't know what wine is it, but really amazing. And say, that was the same bottle which I opened you yesterday. That's why, you know, about the food pairing, that's why I chose yesterday for roast beef and confit potato, deep red wine sauce. Of course, the combination was really good because the sauce was very rustic and the wine is aged as well. But of course, the memory is very important when you drink a wine. So, salute.
What I love about this wine is the evolution of the winery, because I have known Il Molino di Grace for over a decade, and you know, we meet today and we taste these great wines, and I hope you appreciate the selection. I'm loving some of the wines that we are tasting, but I think the timeline is also important, because I'm meeting many of you for the 10th time, the 20th time, and each year there are new stories, there's a higher quality across the board, and for me, Il Molino is an example of this, because I remember the beginnings of this estate. It was very interesting wine, very high quality, but I think this 2011 is probably the best Gran Selezione that I have tasted. So it's great that each winery is still busy looking for ways to improve the quality, because this is very important in the wine business. We should never stop. There is always a next vintage. There is always a new challenge. The market is going on, and we need to adapt, we need to react, and I'm really super happy when I see, you know, when I taste a wine that I know really well in a new vintage, and I think, wow, you know, this is on a level that I've never seen it. So for me, Margone 11, great stuff, and it's also a great ager. We have magnums of 05 still aging in the cellar. Now we have a third Sangiovese. Now it should be the Brunello, Il Paradiso di Frassina. Federico. Ricci, great to see you. So this winery is in Montalcino, not so far from Chianti. It's about 1 hour drive, unless you drive with Stefano, then it's 30 minutes. And then this winery is very famous for having been the first worldwide to experiment with music in the vineyard and the cellar. They were putting music in the loudspeakers first to the aging wine, I think, and then they expanded this method to the vines in the vineyard. And if you go there, it's a cooperation with, I think, Bang & Olufsen, or is it Bose? Bose. They're putting loudspeakers in the vineyard. So the first time I wrote the story about this, again, I got those emails, because I get a lot of emails from my readers, and they're usually laughing at me, you know, oh, another story, just because you are a musicologist. Of course I am. But if you are laughing about this music and wine thing, I suggest two things. First is that you read some scientific research that has been done on it, because it has shown that analytic parameters of the wines are changing when the wine is subjected to music, and it's a very serious research done by the University of Florence, I think. So really, science now confirms this. As you know, science usually doesn't confirm what we know from the vineyard. When we do biodynamics, the scientists are saying this cannot work. You know, when we do blind tasting, they say it's bullshit. You know, there's no difference in the aroma of Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot. But in this case, they actually are confirming that it is having an impact on the wines. And the second recommendations I have is that you go there and you sit in the vineyard for 20 minutes, and you will see that it's also having an effect on you. And if it has an effect on you as a living creature, I'm sure it's going to have an effect on the vines. I'm not sure, because I don't speak to vines all that often. Some of the winemakers in this room do. But certainly on the birds that live in the vineyard, certainly on the little mice that live in the vineyard, certainly on the insects that live in the vineyard. And we all know that the grape quality is also affected by the biomass that we have in the vineyard. And so if all the animals listen to music, they will also have an impact on the vegetative cycle of the vine. So this is a very holistic approach. Sometimes it's a bit hard to get, hard to grasp, because we are talking about things that are hardly measurable, but I think it's very intuitive, you know. If you put Mozart in your living room when you have a kinder party, I've had a kinder party last week for my daughter who is 9, And they were first listening to their own music, and I must tell you, I was becoming really nervous, and so was my dog, and the same with kids. And then we switched over to some Mozart, and the change was palpable. So I'm sure it's the same for the wines. The wine is coming from this vintage 2012 in Brunello that is getting a lot of press at the moment. Some writers have been adamant it's the best in years. I leave it to you to discover. The wine is very traditional in style, is aged in large oak. It's got this sort of evolutive character that I really like about Brunello, because Brunello for me is not supposed to be a young fruity wine. If you want a young fruity wine, you can have Rosso di Montalcino, which is usually a very nice bottle of wine. But Brunello should be a wine for long aging and should show some complex character. Remember, it's the last serious wine to appear on the market. Compulsory 5 years aging in the cellar between oak and bottle, as long as Rioja Gran Reserva. So there are the two last wines to come on the market. And for me, this is showcased very beautifully in this 2012, and I'm sure it's going to have a long life ahead. Kamila, I think you have a few words about Paradiso?
Yes, of course. In 2012, together with Paweł, which was next to me, he was in Il Paradiso di Frasina. It was quite interesting about the speakers, how it's going on, and then we just drive to the winery and just start to looking for that. We had the speakers. There was no music. We were surprised. Where is the Mozart? And after that, after the minutes, Mozart started playing, and it was quite strange. What we had to do. Then we go to the wine cellar. Of course, we have a great tasting, and that was really, I will remember when the music started to play, and we are in the winery, and that was coming through. We know how it works, and we was there when music is playing. It's really interesting. The wine is really great. Great Brunello is, personally, I will keep it for 2 or 3 years just to show more of the value and more aromas in the wine, or decanted for 2 or 3 hours before to serve. Wine is generally some different type of Brunello, because I'm not big fan of Brunello, such a producer like Casanova di Neri. I like something more lighter as a Paradiso di Frasina, because this Brunello is something similar to Nebbiolo, more lighter in the color, more the herbal flavor, good cherry notes as well. That's why I'm a big fan of Il Paradiso. There is a lot of things we can measure the food. There is some rack of lamb, even some meatballs with pasta and tomatoes going well with that. So really gastronomic wine. I really like it.
Great insight, thank you. I agree, it's very traditional Sangiovese. It's rare to get it in this form nowadays. Almost all of Chianti Classico has become quite modern. It's hard to get a very traditional Chianti Classico. In Brunello, there are a few producers still holding to those values. So it's great to have this wine in the glass. Now, the next wine, as we say at Master of Wine Tastings, should be considered in isolation, because it is a very unique wine. It is Pignolo from Friuli, from the Bressan winery, and we have Jelena Misina, the lady boss of the Bressan winery. Thank you for being here. She's coming to Poland regularly to present these wines. They have a great following on our market and many others. Really become a cult winery, and mostly because I think of its championship of traditional grapes, because Bressan is making one of the best verduzzos that you can find, dry in style, so very traditional. Certainly the best example of Schioppettino, which is this very unique traditional grape of Friuli. But I think there is even more interest in this wine that we are having now in the glass, which is in the Pignolo. Pignolo, or Pignol, the more dialectical name on the label in this wine. Pignol is this grape, another example like Viognier, that almost died. Really, there was very little left, a few vines here and there, because it's so hard to grow. It's very low production, it's very capricious. Some years there will be no yield at all. So what is the point of keeping a vine that is not giving you grapes every second year or a year out of 3? So it takes a lot of grit to really stick to a grape variety like this. But the result is in the glass, and I think we have this unique combination of very ripe fruit, very plummy, rich, like almost like cooked plums. We have this famous plum jam in Poland, powidła, that I often get in the Pignolo. But also herbal character, dried herbs. And Friuli, if you go to Friuli, is a strange region. It's on the border between Italy and Slovenia. If you look at on Google Maps, if you look at Google Maps, it's the border between Italy and Slovenia. If you look at history, it's the border between civilizations, because it was the border of the Roman Empire. It was the limes, so strange place to be. Then it was the border between Germanic people, Slavic and Romanic, Italian people. Then it was the border between Venice and Austria, also a very important border, politically speaking, culturally speaking. And also it's a border of climates, because you've got the Mediterranean, some years it's more Mediterranean, and some years it's very continental, it's really cold and not very nice. So in this wine I'm getting some of the Mediterranean character, aromatically speaking, and some of the more continental, the dried herbs, a little bit of the savory, meaty character. And it's also a wine that ages beautifully. And I was in Sicily a few years ago for a vertical of Pignolo, and we went back to, I think, 1983. That was one really of the great, 76. We tasted one of the great tastings of my life with Fulvio presenting the wines, because he was talking about how this wine came about. Again, very hard decisions. He was also fighting against his father to really make the wine like he wanted. So many obstacles on the way to reaching a goal that you can only imagine, that is only in your mind. And this is what is great about great wine. It is born in your mind. And it is a process, it is a challenge. You need to get there. It takes dedication. Quality is never an accident, we know. It is always effort. Sometimes a lot of effort, and you are tempted on the way to stop. You know, I'm just giving up now. I've had enough. I think many winemakers have felt that, like this on the way towards the great goal. But when finally you persevere and you overcome, and you have a wine like this in the glass, I think it's very, very rewarding. And this is education that we get from the great winemakers in the world, and this is education that we get from Bressan, that we have something that didn't exist, and now it is with us, great wine in the glass, Pignolo. So thank you, Jelena, and thank you to Fulvio in absentia for sharing this wine with us, and for importers like Beata in believing in those wineries in the process, because sometimes you join them in the process and you help them in the process, and together you get to that success. So a wine with a story. And our last wine is also a wine with a fantastic historical story. Very few people make this wine like this anymore. And so Lorenzo Dzieduszycki, Italian-Polish family, thank you for making this wine. This is Vinsanto from Tuscany, from Chianti. But this is not Vinsanto like most Vinsantos that you are going to try, which are very sweet. This is Vinsanto. It's very hard for me to really say what it tastes like. Is it semi-dry? Is it semi-sweet? It's really a unique style. So this is a wine that is oxidized in very small barrels called Caratelli. They are a different size, I think. What is the size of these barrels? How many liters? How many? 10 liters. Can you believe this, guys? 10-liter barrels. So think about the surface of oxidation that you have. It's completely amazing. Some producers, they use barrique or demi-barrique. Some, they use this more Caratello, 120 liters or 90 liters. This is 10. So the evaporation is amazing, and I'm sure you are losing probably 60% of the wine, 70% of the wine in the process. This is a 2009. And there are three aspects for me of this wine. One is that you make a grape variety that really is difficult to get any quality out of, which is Trebbiano, Trebbiano di Toscana. You make into something that is really amazing wine. So this is great. The second is that this is so much rooted in history. This is the wine that people were drinking hundreds of years ago for special occasions. This was their Dom Perignon. 600 years ago, this was the Dom Perignon. So it's great to connect with people from the Renaissance era with the Medici, you know, in the 16th century, because when they wanted to celebrate something special, like killing the other family that was there in Florence, they would open a cask of Vinsanto, and this was the celebration wine. So I love the emotion of this, and then really I think the flavor profile, the complexity of this wine is just so amazing. It's unlike anything else. You could say it's a bit like sherry, but there's no sherry that has this sort of raisiny, sweet character to it. You could say it's like Madeira, but Madeira.
It has some Cersei on the
Okay, on the nose, not on the palate, because of course the acidity is a little bit lower and it's a bit sweeter. So this is a unique wine. This is unlike anything else, and it's also unlike any other Vinsanto, because the Vinsantos, they are like cheese. Every Vinsanto is different because it ages differently. You cannot make it the same twice, because you've got the microflora of the yeast in each cellar, and in each barrel is also different. So this is artisanal wine. This is the top of artisanal wine. This cannot be repeated even from vintage to vintage. And I think the last word about this wine is coming from Paweł.
Yes, I very like this rare style of the Vinsanto, which is rather the vinification in the dry way. But of course, there is some residual sugar. So most of the guests in the restaurant thinking that will be very, very sweet, very sticky Vinsanto, like usual is. So fortunately, they have us, the sommelier. We can explain that it's something very unique, and we don't serve this one with any dessert, because there is no enough sugar to compare with that. I'm very often serve this wine in my restaurant with the pâté of foie gras, very rustic in style, with some polished brown champignon, which we specialize in, and some toasted bread. So it's the perfect combination. As well, we put a bit of the onion marmalade, which goes with the natural sugar, but not as much as we have in the dessert. So it goes perfectly, super balanced with this Vinsanto, which is have, in my opinion, a bit the similar style with the sherry Amontillado on the nose, of course. A bit of the nuts, some caramel. So yeah, I'm suggest to serve something like the foie gras or some fatty dish with some chutney or some sweet marmalade. Yeah. Thank you.
I'd just like to say one closing remark, if I may, of how impressed I am with the quality and the dedication and the focus of these wines. And when I was talking to some of the producers yesterday, there was a comment or two that really touched me and made me think about this tasting. And one was Fabio Alessandria, who said, from Bolotto, who said, I want to make Barolos that make you smile a little. And the other one was Giuseppino Anfossi from Guillaume, who said he wanted to make wines that honored his land, his terroir, that has given him this life that he loves so much. So what I want to say is, I think you've really all achieved that. You've done a wonderful job, and you should be proud of yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you for everybody for joining. Thank you to Beata for assembling such a great array of winemakers in the single room, and also in her catalog. I think this is quite an exploit. Congratulations, everybody. You've survived a marathon running on a 100-meter pace, which is great. We're only 15 minutes late. I want to congratulate also our service, because really this was great. Evelina and Philip. We now have lunch, but I have bad news for you. You only have 5 minutes to eat lunch, because people are coming to taste downstairs in a few minutes. But thank you very much for attending. A celebration of life and wine. Thank you very much. Have a good lunch.